door.
I'm sure of that.
She used to be here. They don't have one. A lot less. Sold it to my son. He says, we're the reason
please.
Sorry.
Council President Chili.
Here.
Councilor Briggs.
Here.
Councilor Collins.
Here.
Councilor Crawford is not here. Councilor Dunham.
Here.
Councilor Fitzgerald.
Here.
Councilor Hahn.
Yes.
Councilor Burton. Here. Councilor Woods.
Here.
Okay, well, we're here to talk about water today, which is our number one priority. As long as Ken and I've been on the council, water's been our number one priority and remains that way. We have a wonderful watershed up there. I grew up on it. Several of us are well familiar with it. It's a wonderful asset to this community, and it's made us what we are, basically. With no water, you don't have civilization. And we have civilization. Brian, you want to introduce Craig to the group? They know him, I think, pretty well.
I do. So on the workshop agenda tonight, we have the water discussion. Craig Massey with Jacobs Engineering is here, is going to give us a presentation on the recently completed report on the expanded raw water supply project. We're very happy to have that report. Our engineering staff have reviewed it and gone over it, and we're ready tonight to present that. And then during the regular council meeting this evening, we will ask for a motion to accept the report and give us direction on which option we should be moving forward with. So with that, Gary, I don't know if you had any additional introduction or just turn the baton right over to Craig.
You summed it up excellently. I think it's.
All right.
Okay.
We'll go right to Craig.
It's a pleasure to be here. We were last together earlier this year, it was in February, I think. In fact, we have the agenda, it was March. I'm going to update what those next steps coming out of that meeting were, what we've done, and then describe the preferred alternative. And that's an alternative we arrived at with staff, looking at 7 different alternatives. And we had a very systematic way of scoring alternatives and coming up with criteria, weighting the criteria. And then it was fairly apparent to us why that should be the preferred alternative, but we've actually committed that to writing. I think that narrative is going to be important as the project goes forward and you engage with funding agencies and resource agencies to get their commitment to it. Cost comparison of the preferred alternative and then the second ranked alternative, and then what the next steps likely would be. So, let's see. Okay, so at the March City Council meeting, we left with these next steps. One was that we were going to very soon, within 5 days, have a meeting with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, the biologists and their fish passage staff. We were going to consider moving ahead with the water rights permit application. We were going to consider potentially a Dallas-funded fish study to support negotiations with the fisheries agencies. Determine the preferred location or the preferred alternative, update the cost estimate, and finalize the report. So how did we do on those next steps between then and now? We had the meeting with ODFW, and they concurred, as I think we recognize, that having a single location and concentration of what's likely to be required fish passage elements at the dam for both upstream passage and downstream passage is perfect. And that's just to unpack that a little bit. If we had 2 dams in series on Rickdale Creek, they would both have to have the fish passage elements. That becomes expensive, becomes operationally challenging because we've got the same facilities in 2 different places. So ODFW agreed a single reservoir would be preferred from their perspective, and this all go into it a little bit. It was a preferred alternative for a lot of other reasons too. As far as the water rights permit application, with the city council's direction, I think at your city council meeting tonight, we'll go ahead and initiate a pre-application meeting with Oregon Water Resources Department. We've had a preliminary conversation with them to know what their expectations are for materials that we have ready at that pre-application meeting, and I was just out of my own curiosity, wanted to know how much of that we already had, which is most of it, and I pretty much got that mocked up. It wouldn't take much to finish that and then have that meeting with them. We decided that we don't need to do a fish study. That was partly based on consultation with some other fish biologists as well as some resource agencies. We don't think it's likely to strengthen the city's negotiating position. We did identify the preferred location, and we have updated the cost estimates. And as Brian mentioned, we finished the report. So let's talk about the preferred alternative description. Apologize for the size of the figure here, but yeah. So this is existing Mercer Reservoir up here. This little line here is where the dam is located. And with the fish agencies, we looked at a potential reservoir upstream, and that would then require the removal of Mercer Reservoir. The volume we store in here would be the planned volume you need for the year 2070. We briefly looked at a location downstream, which had a few advantages. It would also require the removal of Mercer Dam. However, this is a spot where steelhead are currently active, and so that becomes a bigger challenge from an Endangered Species Act. And then the off-channel alternatives, and these are the alternatives, and these are really one alternative off-channel with 3 potential locations here. It's kind of moving farther up this drainage. This area can accommodate the storage you would need there. But this is an alternative that would also be removing the dam and then having the infrastructure to pump from Rickreall Creek, presumably at your current intake location, which is, well, actually it's about right here, over to this dam, filling the reservoir, and then pumping back to the water plant and treating the water there. A lot of extra handling, and as you'll see, it's costly to do that. So out of the discussion and a couple of other contributing factors, we arrived at the location immediately downstream of Mercer Dam, which wouldn't require removing the dam, would require breaching the dam so that as this new dam would backwater the existing reservoir, it would inundate that entire area plus some areas upstream. And it addressed a number of deficiencies that the current dam has. And I'll really get to those in a series of bullets on a couple of slides down. But there were a lot of good reasons for this. Here's a little bit more detailed drawing that shows that. So the existing dam is right here. And if you see this smaller dashed line, that represents the outline of the reservoir, probably as it is today, because I think you're pretty close to a full pool from the reservoir today with the wet stream pad. The new dam downstream would be taller, and the water that it would impound at full pool would be the outer dashed line here. So you can see that it goes beyond. Here's kind of where the reservoir ends now. The new reservoir would end clear up here. One thing I should point out is the city owns quite a bit of the property here. They own this piece here, and this piece here, and this piece that's fine on a little graph over here, which is, again, one of the advantages of this location is you already own quite a bit of the property there. It doesn't look like you own exactly all of where a new dam might be located, but most of it. This is probably fairly easy to negotiate, I think. So now we're going to get into kind of a long, there's like 3 slides here, there's just a bunch of words and bullets. And I'll just talk passionately about it instead of the lack of graphics, because this is really a compelling case, I think. You're really sitting, as the mayor mentioned, your watershed is fantastic. It's high quality water, and you get a lot of water out of it. Even in the 1 in 100 year drought year, you get probably 8 times the volume of water coming out of store. So that's coming in the winter. Yeah.
How many acres would we have to purchase to satisfy that?
That's a good question. I didn't calculate that. because you own this already here and this, you can see that big part of this reach up here, which is going up Rockhouse Creek, and this is going up Rickville Creek, you already own. So it would either be land purchase or obtaining an easement for that section right there and this little bit right up here. So it's.
And down at the dam as well, right?
And potentially down here at the dam, yeah. So I might guesstimate that that's 100 acres.
Because this is a new concept we've had in our minds, is thinking of a second dam upstream. But this is I hadn't thought of this.
Right, yeah, and a little bit of the backstory on why this came to the forefront. It was considered, raising Mercer Dam has been considered as far back as the late 80s. But that's technically challenging. What precipitated re-looking at this and really liking the downstream alternative was the city has been supportive of Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife wanting to improve downstream passage on the dam as it exists today. If anybody's been up there, there's a concrete spillway weir, and when water is going over that weir, it plunges down about 14 feet and is flat on a concrete apron, and that goes down a block spillway chute down into the main part of Rickville Creek. And that 14-foot plunge is not healthy for juvenile fish. So what ODFW wanted to do was essentially create about a 4-foot deep pool where the juvenile fish would land in, and they have a much higher survival rate. And then they would overflow another weir and they would just flow on downstream. Knowing that we want to be in a strong negotiating position with ODFW, and that this is a pretty inexpensive project to do, want to be accommodating, but it also is considered a modification of the dam. So we had to go to the dam safety part of Oregon Water Resources Department and say, hey, ODFW wants to do this. What do you think of this? Well, we need to know how it affects the probable maximum flood, probable maximum flood capacity of the spillway, and does the addition of this structure affect the stability of the spillway weir? So we went back and had a sub-consultant generate the probable maximum flood. And it's a really big number. It's derived by imagining every extreme conceivable event kind of happening simultaneously in terms of snowpack, temperature, rainfall, and it's a number that exceeds what the capacity of the spillway is. So knowing that, we knew that the dam has that deficiency built in. So if you didn't do anything, you're eventually going to need to address that deficiency. So a new dam can be designed to handle that flow and eliminate that deficiency with the dam. So that was one of the benefits. And because we need to add fish passage, it's for at least the downstream part of the fish passage, it's going to be much easier to accommodate that in a new design than trying to retrofit it into the existing dam design. So we arrived at a point where accommodating what ODFW was interested in terms of downstream passage, it disclosed that we've got a flow, a peak flow deficiency. Now, just to not have anybody lose sleep over this, almost every dam in Oregon has a probable maximum flood that's calculated now that exceeds the capacity of the dam capacity. It's just part of the inflation of conservatism, I guess, with dam safety engineers maybe. But I'm working for Eugene Water and Electric Board right now, and we have the very same thing at 2 high hazard dams of theirs, where they're going over the top of the dam by a foot in this theoretical probable maximum flood. So, of course, anything new could be designed to handle that. And what Water Resources Department could conceivably require of you, if you weren't looking at a new dam that was going to address that issue, would be to say, either do a risk analysis that demonstrates what the actual hazard would be if that event does occur to the dam as it currently is, or make modifications to pass that flow. So given that the dam has some deficiencies, that was another reason to more seriously consider replacement of the dam. That was a lot. Let me pause there and ask the questions. And I'll try not to use acronyms. Engineering is an acronym-rich environment. That's not necessarily helpful. Okay, well then let me start into why we arrived at this solution. Aside from being least cost, there are a number of other benefits too. So, in terms of water quantity and quality, as I mentioned, you have a watershed that yields tremendous amount of water. More than you could, need to store for the next 50 plus years, and reliably. So, and it's high quality water. Unlike where I live, we get the majority of our water out of the Willamette River, and it's good water. We treat it well, but it's also run through farmland and upstream cities and industries and so on. You have essentially a pristine watershed. There's forestry practices going on to follow the state's conventions, and they're very safe. They don't negatively affect the watershed at all. So you really have a high quality watershed and high quality water. One of the things that's engineered into the sizing of this reservoir is the ability to capture that winter flow and voluntarily release more of it in the July to October time when you can pretty dramatically benefit the stream in terms of the actual additional flow going into the creek and the cooling that has, and the benefit that has to the fish species that use the creek, especially late summer, early fall. I guess I covered the first two bullets there. The other advantage of building the dam where we're thinking about it and having that additional flow release is that flow is released pretty high in the watershed, and so the downstream reach from the dam all the way through Dallas and onto the Willamette all benefits from that increased flow. When we were considering the off-channel one, you might not have any obligation to voluntarily release flow. You might just release enough to keep City Park, the flow going through the City Park in the summer, but being off-channel, you would potentially avoid the need for any fisheries steps in terms of there wouldn't need to be fish passage on that dam very likely, and there wouldn't be necessarily any reason why you would release any additional flow beyond what you really wanted, just to keep things nice and down. And it comes in considerably lower in the creek than it would if it was released up the dam. So there's high quality habitat from Dallas up to the dam, and this flow would be in that reach. As I mentioned, it's high quality water because it's remote, and it would stay that way, right? I don't think you're planning recreation to happen on that reservoir. I wouldn't recommend it. You don't have that precedent now, and to introduce it just introduces more potential risk to your drinking water. And I just can't reiterate enough that the amount of flow, even in releasing, and plan for at your design point, the additional 1.5 million gallons per day released into the creek between, say, July 1st and October, that, compared to what you had last year, that would probably quadruple the amount of flow in the stream. So it's a pretty dramatic decrease in flow. In terms of addressing some of the parts of the existing dam that need some improvement, I mentioned the spillway capacity. That's the first bullet here, and it would address that efficiency. It would be easier to construct both upstream and downstream passage on a new dam. And the upstream passage gets those fish access to about 20 miles, pretty high quality habitat upstream of the dam. In fact, the coho that they have been traveling and hauling around the dam now are quite successfully using those reaches, as are the coastal cutthroat trout that resident upstream to the dam. They don't really have a way downstream except when the flow is going up to the weir and down the spillway. The new dam would meet all the current seismic design criteria. So it would be designed for the controlling earthquake, which very likely is the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake off the coast. Although in some cases there are local faults that could actually be more significant in control. But regardless, your new dam would be designed for that. So there's an element of resiliency to the project. The reservoir volume is sized based on Portland State University population projections, an allowance for industrial use, and this voluntary summertime flow release out to the year 2070. And that industrial allowance is just about what the combination of Willamette and Tyco were using just before they stopped being industrial water use customers here. So that gives a sense of the magnitude of the potential industry that you could offer water to. Wish Jake were here to emphasize this, but so the dam is sort of this shape, right, with the water up here, and there's a stem that goes down to a gate. It's in the very bottom of the dam. There's a pipe out of the bottom of the dam, and to adjust how much flow is released from the dam, they have to go and turn this thing. Well, this stem, the shaft that goes down to this gate's probably 100 feet long. And Jake can tell me, he says he turns it until he feels it getting tight or loose or pop, and he knows it's now started to actually push up. There's so much slack in this thing. So it goes back to the original 1959 dam construction. It was extended when the dam was raised in 71, but it's pretty old infrastructure that's controlling how the water gets in and out.
How much deeper will the reservoir be at the dam?
That's excellent.
'Cause I know what it looks like now. I just wonder how much deeper. It will be.
Yeah, so I gotta get up to the screen. The new dam height is about 115 feet. I think we're 85 feet now, so it's about 30 feet deeper. And we don't expect that to be detrimental to water quality at all. In fact, the fact that you have constant flow coming into and out of the reservoir helps keep the water quality high. All right, let's see. Design standards. One thing that every dam just about like it does on a natural stream is it interrupts the natural transport of gravel from upper reaches of a stream, past the dam to the downstream reaches. It also fills your dam, your reservoir. So it's potential that we could put essentially a rock trap at the head of the reservoir and design it in a way that you could periodically go in, take that material out, recover reservoir volume, move it to the downstream side of the dam, and then let the wind storms carry it on downstream, and you replenish some of the rock that the fish use in spawning areas and other parts of the stream. That transport's essentially been interrupted since 1959. That's not hard to do. It's attractive to the fish agencies, so it's kind of an attractive bargaining chip in negotiations with the fish agencies. So that's something that we would consider in the design as well.
I have a question. I have a question about
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So, what would that look like? Is that an annual, every decade?
No, you might do it every 5 years.
Every 5
I mean, the anniversary of me working with the city is July of 1992. So I can remember it being done twice.
Okay.
Once following a fire, and that was an acute need. And the second time was voluntarily to try to recover some reservoir volume. It fairly quickly became apparent it wasn't cost effective to recover volume around there.
Okay.
But in terms of, getting some rock downstream, there's that thing. But yeah, I don't think you would do it. You would do it on a 5 or 10 year frequency. I mean, you wouldn't do it again.
And I'm sorry, I have another question, but I'm just
Yeah.
gonna ask a follow-up. Is that something that we'll be able to see coming, or is it something we just, every 5 years, we're gonna do this?
I think you would have to engage it on what's actually happening. So big events, so like a year ago, last January, we had a really big flow event here. And that was the event that probably contributed more debris into the reservoir than maybe even the last 3 or 4 years combined.
Okay.
So it would depend on the frequency of events like that. And it'll be apparent because, we're gonna draft this reservoir. I mean, we're gonna, fill it up and we're gonna use water in summer. And we're gonna drop it up, I think last year, we lowered the level more than 20 feet. And so when we do that, those upper reaches are gonna become visible. And that's where we'll see the amount of debris that's deposited.
Okay, that was my next question.
It's
Thank you.
self-revealing.
Okay.
It's self-revealing.
Thank you.
It's not-
I remember back in the 80s, I served on a committee in Salem, and we got a $100,000 grant to dredge the reservoir, to reclaim some
Yeah,
of the silt that had washed down. I remember going up there with Roger Jordan. You remember Roger?
oh, yes. Can anybody not remember?
Roger. And going up there, and there's some wetlands up at the far end.
Yeah.
And I said, let's get rid of that. And he said, we can't because there's wetlands. I said, you tell the wetlands people to get their wetlands out of our reservoir. He said, that isn't how it works.
Yeah, and of course, it wouldn't be there if the reservoir wasn't there, right?
Yeah.
They're created by the reservoir and the operation of it as it draws down.
Well, the weeds started growing, the birds came, and the animals were there, so.
Yeah, there's a lot of collateral benefit, if you will, to other species when it's a reservoir too. Right? The creek certainly has benefit as well, but there's other species that take advantage of a bigger body of water, and some species that prefer it. Well, there's 4 different behaviors, I guess, and I've learned more about the fish in the last 5 years than I ever thought I would. The coastal cutthroat trout exhibit, and one of the behaviors is living in a place like the reservoir and then using the upstream tributaries for that. Another one is downstream of the dam, and another third one is kind of the way they use the Willamette and Rick Riel. And Rick Riel has all 3 of those. I can't remember what the 4th one was, but Rick Riel has all 3 of those reservoirs. Coastal cutthroat.
Michael?
You talked about quadrupling the water flow during the driest months of the year. Are we required in a drought year to do the quadrupling?
You're not required to do it at all.
I know the advantage
Yeah.
to doing it.
Yeah, it's
And I'm
really
excited.
it's really
It's
a
exciting.
mitigation step. It's really a step to avoid, and I'll talk about it when we get to the price.
Okay.
But it's a means to say, gee, there's so many benefits to doing this. We want to do that instead of.
Right.
And the instead of is year-round downstream fish passage, which
Oh, yeah.
which would double the cost of the preferred alternative.
And then during this analysis, are we going to talk about, did we do any more study on landslides in case of a big earthquake? That's why they looked at the off channel.
Yeah.
Do we
Yeah,
have?
actually, the off
potential?
channel's got some steeper areas. We got more concerned about that in kind of the head end of that area than we are in Rickreall. Yeah.
Because we don't think it's going to ever get blocked off. So it deprives our water.
Where we're thinking about the dam is in one of the steepest canyons in the lower part, the mid to lower part of Rickreall. There certainly are some steep areas in the upper part of the watershed, but they don't, the amount of watershed above them is pretty limited, so.
So that rationale for looking on the off channel, what isn't as valid as we thought it would be.
Well, no, because even though that location had some real advantages, it actually had some pretty steep areas where we'd be pretty concerned about sloughing into the reservoir.
Well, we were talking about sloughing below the reservoir.
Yeah.
Actually blocking the
Yeah,
channel.
I don't think we don't see that geologic hazard like, say, just south in the Fulham corridor, where you may remember ODOT ran into some problems building the highway.
You think?
Yeah,
So no real big ancient fault line.
no,
Slides.
the geologic hazard of the report, which I know the mayor has read, right, you're telling me how exciting that was, but yeah, it addresses that. There weren't any hazards like that that precluded any of the alternatives that we considered. I think I mentioned already, the remote location has, it's challenging for the staff that have to go up and operate facilities there, but there's also some benefit to the public not being there all the time, and, watercraft.
You talked about earthquakes. Can you give us an example or what would happen if currently with the dam, current dam,
Yeah,
if it were to go away, what impact would it have on the city and how long do we have?
there's an emergency action plan that lays out the timeframe if there's a dam breach. And I can't cite the time, but there's an alarm system that recognizes that kind of a condition. It's a rapid drawdown condition. And I think I want to say it's only about an hour before significant water would get here. But I'd have to go back.
It wouldn't be a wall of water, it just gradually rises
No.
up.
So a couple things about your dam. One is it has inherently a lot of flexibility because it's an earthen dam with a core and then shell construction. So it's not a monolithic concrete sort of dam that, fractures and then you've got, say, a vertical crack or, failure at a number of points. Two, where you are in the coast range, where we are fairly far away from the Cascades subduction zone in geologic dimensions. I don't believe there's a lot of nearby faults, and we're founded on bedrock with the dam. So while it's likely, it's going to be affected, you probably aren't going to see a catastrophic failure of the dam, and you'd see a much slower release. In fact, I'm kind of speculating now, but I don't even think that the outlet structure is particularly vulnerable. I think I'd be more worried about an event causing it to get plugged up, and then, then the water would rise up and then it would go over the emergency spillway. And that capacity, because we did this study and looked at that capacity, the emergency spillway has the capacity to handle the 1 in 8,000 year flood. So it actually has quite a bit of capacity, even though it can't meet the probable maximum flood, which is about twice that. That was a long answer.
Sorry.
Let's see, so continuing on with why we think this is such a good idea, the fact that it's right where the dam is now means you release from essentially the same point in the infrastructure you've already invested in, the raw water intake, pipeline to the water plant itself, that's all reusable. And all of it really has been designed to be expanded anyway. The water plant can probably increase by another third. I think there's a provision for 2 more filters, and it can currently theoretically do 8 million gallons per day, so that infrastructure can be expanded to 12 million gallons per day. And 12 million gallons per day, that's probably 30, 40 years out in planning. Similarly, the intake was planned for an expansion to match that capacity. And it's gravity. In addition to that flow release, when I keep saying the flow release, I probably should make this point that that's the flow that's in the creek downstream of the intake. You're releasing even more flow upstream of the intake because some of that water you take it in at the intake. So say you're releasing, say it's a day that you want to make 5 million gallons per day for city use. And on top of that, it's July 30th, and you want to release another 1.5 million gallons. So that means, at least 6.5 million is coming down to the intake. 5 million is diverted there to the water plant, and then 1.5 will continue on downstream through town off of it. So there's another benefit to reusing that infrastructure for the creek and for the fishery there as well. Then just a few other considerations. Smaller carbon footprint on the off-stream reservoir. It's going to be a lower cost to construct. There's less infrastructure involved with it. And you don't introduce the long-term double pumping scenario where you pump it out of the creek to this other reservoir, pump it from this other reservoir back to the water plant. That's a lot of piping to get it to the new reservoir, and it's a lot of energy and pumping interrelated between the two when you've been relying on just a one-time pumping from gravity released reservoirs. So that's a benefit from the long-term perspective. Salem made the news 3 years ago, 4 years ago with the algal toxins, the cyanotoxins in the water, and that was it comes from the algae that are in the Army Corps of Engineer reservoirs upstream. So that's a consideration down here where we'd be storing that water that doesn't have that would become a reservoir that doesn't have a natural stream flowing into it and out of it. That can be mitigated. It's pretty straightforward how you do that. You put a grid of diffusers in the bottom of the reservoir, and you have a pure oxygen system, and you basically keep that lower reaches of that reservoir from going anoxic. You introduce oxygen or air to that, and that prohibits the growth of the algae in the form of cyanotoxins that are bad for us to do. So it's about a $5 million package, equipment and piping and stuff to accomplish that, but it can be managed.
We wouldn't need that for.
You would want that, we accounted for that, you would want that in the off-stream one. We don't believe you need that in the one upstream because of the continuous level through it, yeah. And there's this fairly straightforward study that we've done to demonstrate that, even with the additional 30 feet of water depth. Because we would always plan for the bottom outlet from the reservoir.
Can you say that again? Will the preferred alternative, the one we've been talking about, need the diffuse oxygen?
No.
Okay, that's what I thought, and then I confused myself.
Another
Okay.
reason why it's preferred is the water quality would remain high, and you wouldn't need the pure oxygen system that it would be prudent to put in on the off channel.
Okay.
Again, fish passage is much more economically feasible at one location than at two different locations. And I think as I pointed out on the one figure, the city owns probably at least 75% or more of the footprint of that new reservoir. We were successful negotiating and purchasing some land not that many years ago to ensure that you own everything around current Mercer Reservoir. I think it's more than one property owner, but I believe it's all managed by the same timber company, so it may make it easier to negotiate either an easement or purchase of some of that property. But the fact that it's majority owned by Dallas compared to the site over here, which I didn't lose count, I'm exaggerating, but there are a lot of property owners and much more effect to property owners, and it's now it's attractive to users, right? People are going to want to be in the reservoir using it recreationally. Suitable construction materials available at the site. One of the best ways that we demonstrated that is we've already built a dam there and have the history of the borrow areas identified. Plus, we've got pretty high quality quarry just a little ways down, which even may have some suitable core material. You want the core of the dam to be a more impervious material. And there's a fair amount of that in the area up there, but there's also a fair amount of overburden near the quarry as well. So I'll stop there, and I can tell you that Gary and the others on the team, we can get pretty excited about why we think this is such an attractive alternate, because it does so many things while still meeting your need for reliable water supply. It's a benefit to the environment. It's better for the fish.
So it'll be the same kind of dam?
It could be.
Dam?
There's two actually, they're about the same price, but there's two potential dam construction techniques. One would be just like what you got, which is a core and shell dam. And that's very common. We design those. They're all over Oregon, and they're there because the materials are readily available and they're reliable. The other is what's called a roller compacted concrete dam. And that's potentially attractive if passing the probable maximum flood becomes a challenge. The benefit of a lower compacted dam is at a really high flow, the water can go right over the top of the dam and down the dam face. And basically the dam itself can act as the spillway. So that's to be determined in detailed design. But either one is feasible at the location and has the kind of materials nearby to cost effectively construct. I can tell you that Newport is going to be replacing the two dams that they've got at Big Creek. And they're talking about a lower compacted concrete dam there.
Is one or the other better seismic for?
No, they would both be designed to the current seismic considerations. Yeah. No, they both have to meet the current seismic codes. Yeah, we get excited because there are very few projects where you've got tremendous water supply, it's high quality, and building a dam can actually help the fish. We can get fish passage to get them to 20 miles of upstream habitat. We can increase the flow in the driest part of the year, improve the water quality for the fish then. The thing I've been dancing around, and we're going to get to right now with the cost. So you can see that these are alternatives 5 and 7. I think we started out with 3, 4. No, we started out with 4, and then we added to that 3 more, which were essentially the single reservoir option version of the first 4. And it's in the heading of the table, Dallas' second reservoir cost estimate with spillway downstream passage. So what that means is the design of the dam spillway would accommodate passing the fish downstream in the time when water is spilling over the dam, which is, correct.
Is that the 4-foot pool
Well,
of
yeah,
water?
that's what ODFW is wanting to add to what's there now. And what we would put into a new design would be something like that. It would be sort of a stepped pool system to gently get the fish downstream. The species of interest that we think that the agencies have the most interest in typically out-migrate, so little fish are going out in the late spring to about the beginning of July, maybe mid-June. I should say late winter to spring. And that's a time of year we typically are having flow go over the weir. So if we can assume that that's the downstream passage and that we can negotiate with the agencies and ensure that we can get that into June to the beginning of July of most years, that can be done cost effectively. If they say, oh no, we want to have year-round downstream passage for every species, so lamprey, mountain whitefish, other species that aren't federally listed species, that's very expensive. And that's expensive because this reservoir elevation is going to fluctuate. So you can imagine when you're spilling, that water is going over the spillway, so that's kind of free, right? Instead of making a gentle path as they're leaving. When the water level gets below the level of the spillway, you've got to get a fish from down here up over the dam and down. The way that's typically done is what's called a floating collector. So you have, imagine a big giant pontoon boat almost, that has a means of attracting fish to it. So it's going to induce the flow toward itself. So the fish think, oh, this must be the way out. And then you're going to trap them. And then you're going to get to shore and you're going to unload them and you're going to drive them around the dam and reintroduce them on the downstream side. And I'm not picking this up. We've designed several of these for some of the hydro producers. Actually, the Army Corps of Engineers, we've got a design for one at Lookout Point Reservoir.
And that's not just the seasonal.
That would be the
That's-
seasonal,
that's
that would be the
seasonal.
seasonal ones as well as the ones year round.
So would we have to man that every week or month or whatever
Yes.
that might be?
Yes.
Maybe you and I could look and do it.
Yeah, I'm in.
Well,
For one, I want to know more about this fish attractor thing.
And the cost of that would essentially double the cost of alternative farming. So the floating collector that is most representative of what would work here is what we designed for the Army Corps of Engineers Lookout Point. And that's, in today's dollars, is a $58 million collector.
So it would double option 5, basically?
It would double option 5, and it would make option 7, considerably less and therefore more attractive. But the position that we, as a team, have taken is, wow, there's so many benefits to this voluntary release and the dam, the passage that gets the fish out when they are generally going out anyway. And we think that's the position to begin the negotiations from. And if we're forced to it goes off stream. And I think that's a bad story for the fish and frankly for the creek, because without even the voluntary release that the city is doing today from Mercer Reservoir, the stream dries up. It'll just dry up. And in fact, I've got, so this is a 1905 fire map of Dallas. So up here is, W.W. Johnson lumber yard, and right there is the Dallas Electric Light Company facility. This is a blow up of that area here. And this is Rickreall Creek, what was then called Lockreall River. And what you can't read right over here in tiny little writing is nearly dry in summer. So in 1905, it was recognized that, without a dam to essentially artificially release flow in the summer months, Rickreall Creek dries up. And we know that from the flow record as well, even with the reservoir release of flow.
So if we do the math right, the 59,000 option 5,
59 million.
59 million option 5. I wish, right?
Wishful thinking.
Just a lot of numbers.
Jump on that one.
So if we add that fish collection system, it's a $50 million add, makes it 109, roughly $110 million.
Yeah, and now it's 20 million more than the second option.
So, but the year-round downstream passage option is 144?
No, so you'd add 58 to 59, and that would be alternative 5 with year-round downstream.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But compare that to, that would be year-round.
Yeah, that's year-round.
But that's collecting them and moving them
Moving them
downstream.
around. Yes,
But the-
trapping them all.
What is Exhibit 1.4, option 5 for 144 million? What is that?
Option what?
Option 5 on the cost estimate with year-round downstream passage.
What
page on?
Yeah,
I'm on page 29.
let me take a look. Is that here in the page 29?
It sounds to me like that's a fish ladder, right?
The downstream passage is, okay, actually, I got the numbers there. There's 2 dash on.
29 and
Page
76.
1-5.
Oh, I got it, 26. Okay.
It's 29 of
29, okay.
So the upper box, option 5, single reservoir at Mercer Dam for the year-round downstream passage.
Yeah, let me check that, because it ought to be, well, okay, no, we're actually got, the percentages get applied, that's probably, yeah, so the 96 million would be.
Without
this
engineering and,
alternative 5, yeah, and then you add 58 million to that, and then you apply the 20% contingency, the estimate.
why are we adding 50 million to that if it's already year-round downstream passage?
No, this is not, this is spillway downstream passage on what I'm showing on the screen.
Okay.
So that's that's exhibit 1.5. 1.4 has year-round downstream passage, so it has that floating collector inside the reservoir. Very expensive.
Okay,
Yeah. Exhibit 1.5 is the cost estimate for downstream passage only during the spill. So when the flow is naturally exceeding what's you're storing in the dam and going over the spillway, we're gonna have
It's seasonal,
a
this is
means of
year-round.
gently getting the fish downstream. And they can get down anytime, probably from typically November in December through June via that way. So the months that without a floating collector, a fish couldn't get out of the reservoir would be, say, from July 1st until September rains, the reservoir fills back up, which is typically in November. But the species that we're interested in and that ODFW has expressed interest in generally exhibit downstream passage in that time frame. So that's why we feel like we can accommodate what you, the agencies, are telling us is important for these fish downstream migrating. And we can do it without doubling the cost or more of the project. Let me check the 144 number. That could just be the addition of the contingency at 25%.
So Craig, just
Yeah.
doing quick math, the alternate estimate, right, that's the cost of the design, or the cost of the,
That's a construction
Right.
cost. of-
so if you add the collector at 58 million, so 96.38 minus 39.38 is 57.
Okay,
So that's 57 million, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're adding the 58 million to the 39.38. And then you're calculating in the percentages for the permitting, engineering, and the estimate with engineering and then the contingency. So all that gets added in
That's
and that compounds to get to the 144.
Yeah.
So it's just not a straight 58 million. You
Yeah.
have to add in the engineering and all the other
Because
factors.
we've got a contingency at 20%, so now it's 20% of a number that's twice as big. And engineering is at 20% and
25.
25% contingency, yeah.
But that's why we're keeping the two alternates.
Yeah.
That's for negotiation.
Exactly, yeah. Because, so, the effect of the off-stream option to Rickerell Creek is, going to be pretty dry a lot of summers. In fact, I wonder if the coho that had been coming back with much less flow, we would see the returns that we've seen just even last year in a pretty dry year with voluntary releases. We think, I've independently talked to a couple of fish biologists that work in the hydropower industry. So they are negotiating with fisheries agencies all the time. And they have told me repeatedly, don't undervalue the mitigation benefit of this flow. And so that to a stream like Rickerell Creek. And one of them did his master's at OSU and he knows Rickerell Creek pretty well. Says, that's huge. That is a real value to the city in negotiating.
Keeping the flow rate high.
Keeping the flow rate up, yeah, there's so many benefits, and especially if it becomes so cost prohibitive that you go off channel, then you lose even the flow release that you've got today, which is pretty significant. Because, why wouldn't you? You're now not in a fish stream, you don't have any obligation to release. Whether the city would choose to do that or not, I don't know, but it's certainly one potential outcome.
I remember as a child, there was a dam where the swinging bridge is, and there was the swimming pool. And that's where you took swimming lessons, and there was a fish ladder there, and downstream, I remember some pretty dry summers.
Oh, yeah,
You really couldn't float an inner tube downstream.
Yeah. Mayor Dalton's talked about that, and when we look in the record, in fact, last year, we got pretty close to it. You have a low flow that you only see less than 5% of the year, just like, I'm gonna switch units on here, 2 cubic feet per second, 3 cubic feet per second, which is compared to the kind of flows you see in January, 250 cubic feet per second. It's 2 orders of magnitude more flow there. So when you can make that 2 in July or August become 5, that's a big benefit.
Before I ask my question, is there anything that you need to add?
No, I think maybe just the next step. So what would we think next? So I mentioned the permit, water right permit pre-application meeting, and then we want to develop some scopes for the actual finalization of that permit application, having some initial stakeholder meetings. That's what's really gonna flesh out, how much support are we gonna have from different stakeholders, how much opposition would we have? And then identify funding sources. If you followed the story in Newport, they didn't get some big dollars. And you probably haven't been following the news in Bedford, but the Medford Water Commission, we're doing a project with them that's primarily resiliency related improvements, but through the Water and Infrastructure Finance Investment Act, WIFIA, they got $50 million. So there's some big dollar amounts out there. And when a project can tick a lot of these boxes, like the kind of net environmental benefit, resiliency, addressing aging infrastructure, it makes it a more attractive candidate to fund it. That's all I had to add.
So my last question, how long are we looking at before we have to improve our water intake? You gave us a 30-year, 40-year on the.
You would improve it when you are running, you're not able to pump enough water to the water.
But I mean, is there a technical timeline that you think that, I mean, you gave us 30 years on that.
Within 10 years. I would say 5 to 10 years.
And that-
Probably looking at it.
That requires new pipes, new pumps?
No, pipes size for it. It would be additional pumps. The pump station is got a spot in.
I'm very familiar with it.
Any other questions? I realize we're running. City council meeting time. And I'm happy to stay if needed to the city council meeting, if you have any other questions.
I have no other questions.
Thank you so much for answering all of our questions. I really appreciate it.
I really enjoyed this.
Thank you for talking at my level. Sometimes when I was reading your report, I was like, I'm never gonna understand this.
Yeah, well, I think we have to, engineers have to talk that way sometimes. But we can't make it clear
Okay, well,
Thank you.
thank you, Craig. So we're done with our workshop, folks. We'll have a city council meeting here in about 2 or 3 minutes. We'll start right at 7. We appreciate you coming. We'll see you real soon.
Don't we have a parking
Let's do the rest.
So the one time, meeting, I was at a 2-hour start out front, so it had been about 3.5 hours. And I came up to Miguel, I was hearing this is just, I'll get the judge away. Effectively, yeah. Good seeing you.
And go ahead and we'll invite Chase Blue to come up. They'll talk about the additional testimony that was received. They'll say the recommendation is still to deny the application. And then they'll pass it back to them. You'll just say, all right, Councilor, this is your opportunity now to deliberation. There's a recommendation. So
All right.
that's the same as that.
Good, I just got the,
You got your
it's been kicking around too long.
It did for back then, but.
Yeah, I dated it for July 12th. We didn't get it in time to read this in advance, but I could still, it's fine.
No, I think it's fine to say, hey, I signed a proclamation. on
Yeah,
July
just to let you know,
Yeah, I'm gonna read it.
read it,
record now.
right.
That's fine.
Yeah, I think so. I can wing it, take it
And then 2 and 4 discussion.
2,
Are you
yeah, and, there's something else. Okay, sure, you're not gonna take half an hour or something doing that.
No, you shouldn't.
Because that could get pretty tedious. And if they start really It's 7 o'clock, so let's have a city council meeting here in the city of Dallas, Oregon on this beautiful Monday, July 18th. Glad you all to come to visit with us about whatever you are here to visit us about. We really savor a crowd, and it's great for you to see all this wonderful legislative action going on in this room. Our city councilors are wandering back. We just had a long presentation on our proposed new dam to improve the water supply for the city of Dallas. We have the most wonderful watershed up there. It's clean, pure water in great abundance. And we're fortunate to have an engineering firm that's helping us plan for a new dam that will carry us through for at least the next 50 years. So that was a very interesting session we all had. So again, I appreciate you all coming, and it looks like most everybody's here. So the secretary will call the roll.
Council President Schilling,
Here.
Councilor Briggs,
Here.
Councilor Collins,
Present.
Councilor Crawford,
Here.
Councilor Dunham,
Here.
Councilor Fitzgerald,
Here.
Councilor Hahn,
Here.
Councilor Burton,
Here.
and Councilor Woods. I think it's
He's
just-
right
That's
outside.
right.
He'll be here.
I do also want to note that the city attorney, Lane Chatterley, is participating remotely today.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
All right, yeah, thanks, council members. I accepted the positive proposal last Friday, very light piece, but I decided the better thing to do was not come to city council and show you all. So I did listen in on the workshop, and I was listening in through the council meeting. I have the capacity to join by audio. So any questions along the way, don't hesitate to ask. And if I hear that Jessica and I might need to speak up to the mayor, I may just go ahead and do that.
Good. Well, off we go. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Well done. Off we go to introductions. I believe we have a couple of them.
You do, Mayor. Thank you. So tonight we have two new employees that are with us. Let's go ahead and start with Gary, our Public Works Director, and he will introduce his newest employee. And then we'll move to Charlie, our Economic and Community Development Director, to introduce his new employee.
I'm very pleased to introduce you to Mike Quisenberry. He's our new environmental compliance and field technician. He'll be managing our TMDL program with DEQ. He'll be conducting our backflow program. He'll be doing other things like tree inventories, street tree program, and other compliance reporting to the state. So this is a position that we've needed to fill for some time, and now we have. I think Mike's got the right kind of mindset for that, so I'm really excited to have him on board.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. I'm pleased to introduce Tyler Ferrari, who joined our team on July 1st as our new Economic Development Specialist. Tyler will be working a lot on various aspects of community and economic development, to include historic preservation, working with the Downtown Association, the Visitor Center, and other economic development downtown tourism things. We're really happy to have him. He came to us via Southern California. This is his first time in Oregon.
Welcome. Good. Thank you very much. Great new employees. All right, on to a proclamation I have for us today, and it's about Mark Hatfield. I think most of you know about Mark Hatfield. Whereas Mark Odom Hatfield was born in Dallas, Oregon on July 12th, 1922, the only son of Debbie Odom Hatfield, a school teacher, and Charles Hatfield, a blacksmith for the Southern Pacific Railroad, and where his maternal grandfather had been our town constable after migrating west from Tennessee in 1909. Whereas young Mark Hatfield, growing up here until the age of 12, learned to measure time by the noon fire whistle, the 5 o'clock mill whistle, and developed a taste for the peppermints from C.L. Kreider, who would give him he would give him for paying his family's bill by the 10th of every month, and learned to love buttermilk at Wagner's Creamery. Whereas Ensign Mark Hatfield enlisted in the U.S. Navy in 1943, commanded landing craft in Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and other Pacific theater battles, and was honorably discharged as a lieutenant junior grade after being among the first outsiders to visit Hiroshima, Japan in 1945, whereas Governor Mark Hatfield was elected to our state's highest office in 1958 after serving several terms in the Oregon legislature, and as Secretary of State and reelected in 1962, whereas U.S. Senator Mark Hatfield was the first elected to Congress in 1966 and reelected for 4 consecutive terms, making him the longest serving U.S. Senator in Oregon history. Whereas from time to time, he was first elected to the House of Representatives in 1950 until his retirement from the U.S. Senate in 1996. This son of Dallas served our state and our country with great distinction and honor, always putting people ahead of politics and voting his conscience. Whereas throughout his long life, he always remembered Dallas fondly and the many friends he made here, to include my own family. And now, therefore, I, Brian Dalton, by virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor of the city of Dallas, do hereby declare July 12th, his birthday, 2022, his 100th birthday, to be Mark Hatfield Day in Dallas, Oregon. May we all learn from his extraordinary example of service, character, and compromise. That's Mark Hatfield for you. Thank you for listening. Off we go. We have a public hearing, and that's a continuation of the public hearing on the application for the comprehensive plan amendment and zone change of property at 1775 Southeast Godsey. That's land use file number CPA-22-01 and ZC-22-01, and that we had last heard that on June 20th, and this is actually a continuation of that particular hearing, which allows for written testimony. Brian?
Thank you, Mayor Dalton. So I'll invite Chase Blue, our city planner, to come up and just talk about the process since the June 20th public hearing, any testimony that we received, and the staff's recommendation on this application.
Yes, I don't have a prepared presentation for you, just to keep things brief. But this is the proposal for the zone change and comprehensive plan amendment of the property along the cutoff of Godsey Road, which you may recall from the previous meeting. At that meeting, the decision was to leave the record open for a certain number of days so the public could continue to provide testimony. After the close of that testimony period, there was an opportunity for the applicant to provide a written response, which they have done so. Those documents are included in your packet. Staff's recommendation hasn't really changed. Planning Commission's recommendation, again, not to approve. So you're welcome to take any testimony that's been received into consideration, and your decision on how to balance those different priorities.
Questions? Anything? I believe we have the recommended action and motion on page 5. Is that correct, Brian?
Yes.
That's and so I would entertain this motion to deny the requested comprehensive plan amendment and zone change from industrial to high-density residential RH. Direct city attorney to prepare findings and an order denying the request. Correct? All right. Anyone like to make that motion? It's moved by Bill and seconded by Michael. Any discussion? Hearing none. Go ahead, Lane.
Before you go to the vote, I want to clear for the record, so we can assume it will be a notice of decision, that the crux of this action based recommendation is the council's interpretation of the comprehensive plan policies around industrial land. Is that correct?
Yes, Michael, take that.
Can somebody repeat what he
And the
said?
factual basis
Right.
that
What he just,
This is the council is dealing with this piece of private industrial land, will be protected for industrial development and not litigation.
no, kind of just repeat what Lane just said and reiterate some of the points. The housing needs analysis stated that we were changing RL to RM. This application asks to change industrial to RH, has nothing to do with the needs analysis. Second, this is industrial land that we had a major engineering firm come in, give us their testimony from their attorney, and basically said the reason they moved here was because it's industrial land, surrounded by industrial land, and that's why they wanted to be here. And third is what Lane just brought up, and this is part of our policies. And if you look at our policies under industrial, not under residential, but under the industrial policies, it's to save our prime industrial land, which this land is served by utilities, it's served by the road systems, and it is in conjunction with the rest of the industrial ground. And it is also, one thing that we haven't talked about, the topography of it is flat. So hillsides are not great places for industrial. And I believe that's a reiteration of what you said, Lane, is that correct?
Thank you. Yes, I just want to make sure that was calculated.
Right, any further comments or questions? You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Motion carries unanimously. All right. Does that amount to the public hearing, Brian? Is that
That's
what we
correct.
need? All right.
Move on to the next side.
I'm sorry?
We can move on to the next side.
Yeah, good.
Although, Mr. Mayor, just for the name, I'm not sure who was in the room, and I can see the notice that notice of decision will go out and to all parties participating, the applicant and all parties who participated in the hearing will submit testimony, and the notice of decision will include, notice of joint to appeal.
All right,
I have a quick question.
yeah,
I'm looking, I see a lot of confused people. Could someone clarify for everyone else, like what that actually meant, what we just voted on?
Sure,
Go ahead.
so I'm happy to do that here. So the public hearing and the public testimony was all taken at the last meeting on June 20th. And so at that meeting, the record was held open during the time period. I think we went until June 30th for anyone to submit written testimony, and then 7 additional days for the applicant to submit rebuttal. So all the testimony was then gathered. We received some additional letters and the applicant's additional testimony and their rebuttal. And so all of that was included in the record in the information that the city council received tonight and deliberated on. So once all that information was then presented to the council, you had the opportunity to review it. A motion was made by Bill Hahn to deny the applicant's request, which would retain the land as industrial property. That motion was seconded by Councilor Schilling, and it was passed by the council. So what that means for everyone here is that the applicant's request to convert that land from industrial to residential will not happen. And then there is an opportunity for anyone who participated in the public process to appeal the council's decision to the State Land Use Board of Appeals. That has to take place within 21 days after the notice of decision is issued. Everyone who participated in the hearing will get a copy of that notice once it's prepared.
all right. For those of you interested in that, I hope that satisfies your interest. And, we do appreciate you coming to witness our work. Thank you very much. If you'd like to stick around to talk about water treatment plants and mushrooms, like psychedelic mushrooms, and the League of Oregon Cities priorities, feel welcome. All right, off we go to public comment. This is the chance that any of you have to come and speak before us this evening on any topic that you would like to talk about for a whole 5 minutes. When you come forward, please give us your name and your address and adhere to the 5-minute requirement. And you can just raise your hand. I do happen to have one person who has signed up to talk first, and that would be Eddie. Come on up and give us 5 minutes of wisdom.
Oh, I talk so fast, probably. I'm Eddie Nelson, address 537 Southwest Augustus Drive in Dallas, Oregon. I am a volunteer, a board member, and the treasurer for the Dallas Food Bank. I'm here to comment on your agenda item 8B, which is the food bank request to partner with cities to apply for a community block development grant. We have grown our facility Our families are standing outside during the winter time, they're standing outside in the heat. We have no way of getting our families inside. It's been our dream for a long time to own our own building and to be able to provide a facility that would work not only for the food bank, but also for our families and our community. Agenda item 8B, there's a letter that we submitted, and my comment is that the letter before you outlines our request. However, we want to make sure that we have the council's commitment that ownership of the new food bank facility would be turned over to the Dallas Food Bank before we even begin writing the grant process. The city manager's recommendation indicates property ownership could be addressed after the grant is approved. We would like the understanding to be upfront as it will impact our fundraising approach and strategy and long-term vision for the facility. So we are seeking approval of the city manager's recommendation with the amendment that the city's intention is to turn over ownership of the building to the Dallas Food Bank. We're also known as the Dallas Emergency Food Corporation. The city will have no financial investment in this process. The Dallas Food Bank will be incurring expenses for grant preparation, fundraising, and property acquisition. We will be seeking other grantors and a capital campaign. It would be nice to say that we are raising money for the Dallas Food Bank building instead of a building that is going to be owned by the city. So we need to have clarification of this before we go out seeking other funds. The CDBG grant requires that the property is to be used as a food bank for at least 5 years. The Dallas Food Bank will own and maintain the property. The Dallas Food Bank Board of Directors has a fiduciary responsibility not only to the food bank, but to the families we serve, and we want to be able to feel confident to say that we will be the owner of the Dallas Food Bank property. So that is the request that we are asking, that this agenda, the recommendation by the city manager be amended. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. We'll be discussing this coming up. Thanks a lot. Anyone else wish to visit with us this evening? Anybody? 5 minutes. Hearing nobody? Good. Thanks very much. Anybody? We have people on the phone here too sometimes, so not tonight. All right, off we go to the consent agenda, which you'll find on a variety of pages. It consists of the approval of the June 20th City Council meeting, the acknowledgement of the June 27th Public Safety meeting, acknowledgement of the June financial report, appointment to the Midland Valley Community Development Partnership of me to it, and itinerant merchant master license approval for Crazy Days, which is coming up. Anybody wants to withdraw any of that for discussion? Hearing none, I'd recommend a motion. Move approval by Larry and seconded by Rod. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Motion passes unanimously. We have the consent agenda approved. Reports and comments from the mayor and council members. Anybody have anything for us this evening? Going into this beautiful summer full of events. Anybody? I have to, go ahead.
Are we gonna have something about Crazy Days, how many merchants we have?
I can certainly talk about Crazy Days underneath the city manager report, unless you want to talk about it now.
I happened to be running this morning. I ran out on our trail system there on the west side of town. And it's a beautiful trail. It's really a lovely trail, and it's very obscure. It's at the end of Applegate Trail Drive, and you park there on the side of the street and wander back to the creek, and it's an absolutely beautiful stretch of creek and beautiful trail.
We were talking about it earlier, so maybe we could just give a shout out to all the folks who have cleaned the trail system and cleaned the debris and the overgrowth around the trail system. It's beautiful. We were talking about that right before the meeting comes. So if you pass that along to all the people, that'd be great, because
a lot of work going into the trail this year and a lot of use of the trail, particularly the one by the aquatic center there. A lot of dog walking going on. Okay, anything else? Cool. Well, I'll show up at Summerfest. On to our reports from city manager and staff.
All right, thank you, Mayor Dalton. So tonight we have several reports. The first one is a presentation from our Fort County Sheriff, Mark Garten. He will be talking about the law enforcement intentional use of deadly physical force response plan from the county. So Sheriff Garten is going to come up and give us your presentation on that. Great.
Hopefully it'll be quick. So the reason we're here, or that I'm here presenting this plan, is this is a state statute requirement for every county in the state to have a response plan that kind of outlines when deadly force is used, kind of the overall arching structure of how the investigation should go. Not this is how we investigate, but make sure timelines are met, make sure reporting is done to the state. And then it also outlines who, like, for instance, if the sheriff's office had a shooting or any other kind of use of deadly force, that we wouldn't be the one investigating that use, or that incident would be an outside entity that would come in and do that. So it really does kind of outline all that. Quick. So part of the bill, and this is all out in statute, and so there's not a lot of extra things that can be put into this. It is very structured in what it needs to be. It does include one police chief. However, in our circumstance, we used all the police chiefs in this group. The VA, myself, are the chairs of that group. OSP is involved. There's tribal nation, which there is. Grand Ron is involved in that process as well. We have a labor representative from a police department or sheriff's office union, and then also a public member, which we had a public member of local business owner here. So we met a couple months ago, and we kind of looked at, hey, do we need to review this? It is required that we review it. Doesn't mean that we have to come to each council every year, but we do have to look at it every year to make sure that there weren't any changes to the bill or anything like that into the sort of more statutes that pertain to this. And one thing we noticed, it wasn't wrong, but it was pretty vague, our current plan, in terms of the reporting requirement to the Department of Justice or Department of Justice. We just said we need to report to them. It didn't say what we need to report to them, so we added a section in there that says the things that are outlined in statute of what we need to do: name, birthday, sex, race, all the particulars that the state wants. And so we actually put that in there and lined it out of the things that we need to report to them. That is the really only substantive change. There was a few grammatical errors that we found, but that's really the only change that we have. Let's see here. So with all these, with this plan, it's been in place since 2008. There's been several variations of it over the years, but really what it comes down to is to make sure that the public knows that if an incident like this happens, these are the steps that the investigation will at least go down. Not the ins and outs of the investigation, but how the process should work. One example is in a shooting, an officer at the initial scene provides basic limited information. That is just standard. It's not something that you go and do a full-on interview with. That happens after 48 hours, at least 48 hours. That's outlined in this plan. Another part of it is mental health treatment for the involved officer or deputy that says we have to at least offer 2 sessions. One has to be mandatory. One is optional. At least this is all the bare minimum stuff. Agencies do have, my agency included, we have policies that can go further than that, but definitely not any lower than that. That's not that we all at least go to the same level that this plan is. This doesn't set standards of use of force. And that is something that sometimes people get mixed up, because this is really not about case law, not about, how the force is used. That's the district attorney's job when it comes down to prosecution. So the grand jury process, where they bring in experts or, witnesses, and that's where all the nuts and bolts are really determined in the investigation. And this doesn't supersede that, it just outlines who's in charge of what role during, if one of these incidents occurs. We've been fortunate where we haven't had that many incidences, but they do happen. We just want to be ready and have the most up-to-date plan. So these are just the key elements, nothing, again, these aren't new things, these are just kind of the highlights of the plan. In regards to education, we did hold a public hearing as well about a month ago, which is required by statute. And we didn't have any additional comments that were brought into that public hearing. And then part of the initial planning meeting, the public hearing, and then going to each city council, it's also required. And we have to come and ask for approval from each city or tribal government. The approval is as simple as approve or not approve. There's no changes that each city can make. If there is a change that we need to fix, obviously we're going to do that, but we've got to start the process over. So we don't want to rush things and get things to the point where we have to stop and start over. 2/3 of the councils or governments need to approve the plan in order for us to send this plan to the state, to the Department of Justice, for them to make sure that it meets all statutory requirements. So that's really where we're at right now. I would and I believe you guys had a copy, or were given a copy of the plan. Is there any questions that any of you may have? Yes.
Kirsten?
I just noticed in your presentation or in the materials we reviewed, the use of deadly, for the term use of deadly force and the term intentional use of deadly force seem to be interchangeable. Is there a difference between use and intentional use?
No, the reason I can tell you, the reason we decided to call that on the heading of the plan is that if, for instance, if there was a unfortunate crash that killed someone, that doesn't necessarily mean that it was an intentional act of using force, even though we just didn't want it to have it limited to, not limited, but it's open to any kind of situation where deadly force happened. It needs to be intentional, specific to that incident, not just like a car wreck or something like that. That would,
Is use of deadly force defined differently by our sheriffs?
Yes.
Okay.
It's all the same. It's all state bureau case law.
Okay, we use the same definitions.
Yes, everybody uses the same, and we all, part of this plan is we have to submit all the city police departments policies, all that stuff to make sure DOJ, when they look at it, they evaluate it and make sure it meets all the standards as well. So all of our policies are very, very, very similar.
So, Mark, you said that you added, this is the only change you made was to add the reporting. So would that be section 9 that was added?
Section 9 was there, and we reworded it.
It's been reworded?
Yeah.
There's no way for me to identify what was amended. I was just kind of wondering what was changed.
It literally said, provide information to the Department of Justice on this specific person. Yeah, it was very vague in statute, and it would probably fly, but we just wanted to really make sure everyone's on the same page. This is the information that we need to have. We need to have it here.
I got one other question. So that's the end of your policy, right? Then I see we have a Dallas Police Department policy here as well. Are they the same? Or, I haven't read them, obviously, or read this one.
So they're going to be very, very, very similar. Formatting might look a little different, but the nuts and bolts of how and when we can use force is not. It's not necessarily. Agencies just can't just make up their own. There's some standards. The standards are across the board for all of our agencies. They're all the same. There might be additional things or additional policy type of reporting requirements within an agency that might be above and beyond what is the bare minimum that's required by statute in the state.
Chief Simpson, do you want to add anything to Sheriff Carter?
Yes, I just want to make sure that Council Bridge is clear. What Sheriff is discussing primarily is the county-wide use of force plan. Our policy on use of force, Monmouth, Independence, the tribes, the county's policies on use of force are attachments to this plan.
So what are we being asked to approve? The counties?
You're being asked to approve the county's plan, which incorporates as an attachment our use of deadly force. So we wanted to share both the city's policy and the county's response plan.
Okay.
Any further questions on this? So we have a recommended motion here, Brian, is that correct?
That's correct. It's on
And
page-
I see it says, and I would encourage it, I move to approve the Polk County Law Enforcement intentional use of deadly physical force response plan. And you mentioned it includes our annex. Is that
Right,
part of the
by-
motion now?
It doesn't need to be part of the motion. The response plan includes as an attachment our policy.
All right, good. I entertain that motion by Bill and seconded by Rod, the subject matter expert in this, I think. Any discussion about this? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Sheriff, we appreciate it. Good work. Brian?
All right, thank you. So next up on the agenda is the Dallas Food Bank request. You heard a public comment on this earlier this evening. So the Dallas Food Bank submitted a letter. It's on page 145 of your packet. It's from Jason Thornton, who's the president of the current president of the Dallas Food Bank Board of Directors. And what they are requesting is for a partnership with the city of Dallas. That they would also partner with Polk Community Development Corporation, who would help write the grant. And the city, so the community developed to apply for a community development block grant to obtain funding for the acquisition of land and also the construction of a building for the Dallas Food Bank. The community development block grant is limited on who can be an eligible applicant. Nonprofit organizations typically aren't eligible. Local governments are. And so that's why the partnership is necessary, to have the nonprofit organization, the Dallas Food Bank, partner with the city to be able to be the applicant on their behalf. And so, as we pointed out in the comments earlier this evening, the Dallas Food Bank would like to see, would like to have ownership of that. In my conversation with them early on, the timing of the ownership, was just make sure that they own it at the end. So I wasn't, in my recommendation, indifferent to when the ownership takes place. I really don't think it matters. At the end of the day, I think it's important for them to have ownership and know that they will have ownership of that building and once it's constructed. If it matters for the food bank on having ownership for fundraising purposes, before the application is submitted or an award is made, staff has no objection to that myself as the person that recommended the motion. But staff are certainly in favor of putting together an application with Polk Community Development Corporation on behalf of the food bank. The city is limited to 2 community development block grant applications awarded at any one time. We currently have one for the housing rehabilitation program. It was a $400,000 grant that we've received. We're still working through that process. That grant award is still open. And so this would be the second request. So if the council wants to move forward with this and commit to doing this in partnership with the food bank, we could not apply for another community development block grant until either the housing rehabilitation loan program grant or this grant, if awarded, were to be completed and closed out, then making it available for us to apply for another grant. So that's something to keep in mind. That being said, I think that this project has a lot of merit. There's certainly a need in our community, and staff would support the applicants, the food bank's request to have that partnership. So there's a recommended motion. It's on page 144. And I'll stop my report there. I believe the food bank, I don't know, Eddie, or if there's others who are interested in speaking on this topic at this time, but I'll turn it over to the mayor. He can invite that testimony if you'd like to have it.
All right. Would the council welcome that testimony? Because we ordinarily don't have that unless you all want to hear it. Yes, yes. I'm not seeing, yes.
So this is just.
I don't see an overwhelming yes here,
I think
so.
we've already had that testimony.
Yeah, I don't know, Eddie, is there anyone else that wanted to speak on this topic tonight?
Unfortunately, we have a rampant COVID outbreak in our community, so I don't know.
Okay, well, we'll take your good testimony at face value.
Yeah,
How's
and I
that?
would say the letter with their request is on page 145 of the packet.
Right,
So
I think we
their
have good information.
We have questions. So, how long would this hold us? You mentioned that we were only eligible to have 2 at a time. Are we talking a 5-year period here, or?
No, so you can only have 2 open applications at one time. So from when the community development block grant is, submitted and awarded, and really I'm looking at you because you're much more of an expert on this. I believe you can only have 2 awards at one time. So you would have to close out one of the grants before you could then apply and receive a third, the next one. So we have the $400,000 housing rehabilitation grant that's open. This would be a second one if we got it awarded. So then you have 2 open grants. You would have to close out the housing rehab grant program, or this one before you could apply for the next grant opportunity, if you want to take advantage of that. So the city doesn't have any active plans for additional community development block grant opportunities, right away. And so I think the timing of this is right, to be able to pursue it.
What do you mean by close out?
Meaning the grant, so with the food bank, it would be that the building is constructed, all the bills are paid, and we're able to say we're done with the grant project. And so then we go through a closeout process with the awarding agency. So we work with the state, who it's a grant, it's federal funds that are funneled through Business Oregon at the state. So we work with Business Oregon at the state to close out the grant.
What would that look like for the housing and rehab?
So the housing and rehab would be all of the funds are expended from that program.
Okay, thank you.
I can't speak to that.
Yeah, and so,
I can-
yeah, if you want to just address that on the housing and rehab side. So Kimberly Wiles with Polk CDC.
I'm Julie Wild with Polk CDC, and my address is 2717 Fairgrove, Northwest, and Denton. So, wasn't ready to speak, but I will. The housing rehab grant actually will be closed out in 2022, and we will not be applying for the CDBG grant for the food bank until 2023. So they will not overlap.
Okay, so it's have the one still. Okay.
Thanks. Michael.
She addressed my timeframes.
Debbie.
That was exactly my question, because I knew they were connected.
Yeah, Larry.
So I'm all for helping the cause here, but I don't understand the mechanics. So we're gonna receive the money from the state. They're gonna build it, but we're gonna own it?
No, so they want to own the building. So unlike the senior center that we own that building and lease it to the seniors, the food bank would like ownership of the building, right? So we would apply for the funding, which we could do, and then we could enter into an agreement to sell it to the food bank for $1, whatever the council decides is reasonable and fair, to have the ownership to be with the food bank. So they would like to have the ownership of the building once it's completed and constructed.
So we're building it.
But we would build it using the funds from the community development block grant and any supplemental funds that the food bank would provide towards that project.
Who decides how and where and what we build?
So that would be in a partnership with the food bank. Yeah. So we're really just the mode of application because the food bank cannot apply for these funds.
They're not a 190 or it's 190.
Right.
To be mastered by the Polk CDC.
Right.
Typically with the architecture and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so Polk CDC would administer the grant, the design, all that. They would work with the food bank and the city to make sure that there's money to pay with what the design is going to accommodate in the land acquisition and all that.
And so therefore it would not go, right. So therefore I would assume that it would not go forward with construction until the funds are there for it to be built without debt.
Correct.
And then with our motion, that will probably include an amendment to the recommended motion, just to put the intent to sell it, to transfer title of it, which I think you do have to have a remuneration, which $1 sounds fine. That way they can do their fundraising so that they know that they own the building. Is that correct?
And then Rod.
What's the likelihood that we could have another block grant request occur that would make us in that area that would be gray as far as having too many out at the same time?
Well, it sounds like with the notes from Kimberly Lyle that we'll only have one application active with the food bank. So we would have the capacity to add one additional project. And that can be a variety of things. It can be, additional housing rehabilitation program if we wanted to pursue that. There are, block grants to be used for other, public facilities like libraries, shelters, for warming and cooling, sheltering the houseless. Those sorts of things can also be applied for community development block grant funds. So it would just be, the will of the council to say, hey, we want to have this in our community and the block grant could fund it. So it's really up to this body to decide what you would want to apply for. So it's, like I said, there's no projects that are on the horizon that are on our strategic plan or, within any documents that we have to say we're going to do these projects that are going to require CDBG funds, in the next 5 years. So I don't think we're going to hit any issues.
Rod then, Michael.
Is that enough money to fulfill this to buy property and build this building that they need?
So that's a great question. If they come up short with the community development block grant money funds, they would be doing additional fundraising. My understanding is they're already doing that fundraising and the capital campaigning to get additional funds.
Okay. So we're not on the hook.
Right. So
for that difference.
And I would say that you don't necessarily have to amend the motion of when the ownership is and all that. Just say that, subject to a contract that we'll enter into with Dallas Food Bank, and you understand what their intentions are, and we can have our legal counsel draft a contract before we even make application, with this. So just so we have an agreement on, what this is going to look like afterwards.
Is that a head nod from the council on that one? Okay.
And then time frame. So this grant's going out next year, construction then takes place over the next 2 years, so it ties it up to 3 years.
Right, so we would put application in, we're doing the May cycle or the spring cycle, is that right? And those are, we find out about those in the early summer for awards. And so then, yes, depending on the speed and timing of the food bank, I know they're still seeking out property. I don't think they've secured a site, and so that's part of the process. So this is kind of an early request to say, hey, is the council interested in partnering with us? Once we get this kicked off, yes, we would agree. Then it's going to be till spring before we make the application, probably at least 2, I would say 3 years on the long side to get it all constructed. So you're probably looking at spring of 2026.
Further questions? Okay.
So I assume, or regardless who owns it, the city or the food bank, it won't be on the tax rolls.
Correct.
And where would this building, what zone would this building best be in?
So as a community service building, it can be placed in any of our commercial zones or our industrial zones. I don't think that use is permitted in any of our residential zones. So it would be commercial or industrial zone property, including the downtown Central Core.
Okay, any other questions? Hearing none, I entertain a motion of the city of Dallas to agree to be the applicant for the community development block grant application for the purpose of securing land and constructing a building to be used as food bank. Motion to buy, moved by Debbie, seconded by Kim. Thank you, Kim. Any further discussion?
Sharing the wealth.
Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Both same. There you go. Unanimous.
Thank you.
Good luck with it. Fundraising.
All right, thank you, Mayor Dalton. So next up on the agenda is the League of Oregon Cities legislative priorities. So I gave these to the council at least a meeting or so ago. So they're also included in your packet again for discussion tonight. There are 29 priorities, legislative concept priorities that the league, through their policy committees, have identified. I will note, and the league lobbyists, have said this repeatedly through their the formation of these policy priority concepts, is that all 29 of these will be priorities that the league will support through the 2023 legislative session. The process that we're going through is to identify statewide what are the top 5 priorities that the league will be more proactive in pursuing with legislators during the session and the time leading up to the session. So what we're asked to do is to identify the city of Dallas's top 5 of these 29 priorities. And then you'll identify what those are tonight. And then direct me to go on their online voting system, identify our top 5 for the city of Dallas. They then get taken to the league board with all the other cities in the state that have cast their votes. And the league board will then identify their top 5 priorities based on our input and feedback. But just know that if one of your priorities that maybe is important to you, but doesn't reach the consensus of the group here for the top 5, that priority is still going to receive the support from the league lobbyists during the legislative session. So just keep that in mind. And as we go into that session, you'll have opportunities to participate in the legislative process on any of these topics as they come up. So with that, I'll kind of turn it back to you, Mayor Dalton, to kind of kick off. And I don't know if councilors have looked at these. I know a lot of you have. You've talked with me about them. But I would just start throwing out which ones we think are important for the city.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult because these are complicated.
Some of them sound very similar. If
some
everyone's
similar.
read them, has everyone like chosen their 5? It seems like it'd be easier to identify it by number and letter because some of them sound almost identical.
Yeah, and we can certainly do that. I would maybe even break it down, Mayor, by policy committee and saying, are there any in the community development policy committee that rank in the top 5, and just see if there's ones that we can scratch off the list.
Well, I think it might be easier. Let me see if I can wrap my arms around it. For instance, I picked my top 5. Yeah, I even sent you a note about it. And assume that everybody here has picked their top 5, or we could take a 5-minute recess and they could do that. And then what we'll do is just go right down the line. We'll raise our hands. You take a tally of each of those, and the 5 winners, let's say, come out ahead. That's about the only way I can see doing something this complicated. Is that fair? Let's find out first. Is there anybody who wants a 5-minute recess to quick pick their 5 in all this, or do you already have it in your head which ones you want? Ken?
Well, I serve on 2 of these committees. One I chair, and the other, and I've got 5 picked that are only in those 2 categories because I'm familiar with them. So.
Okay, but if we go through each one, then we all raise our hands and we'll take a tally at each one. I have a lot of connection with several of these myself, so I have my personal favorites, but each of you assume has your personal favorites. And we could say maybe a 1 sentence, if you want to talk about it, say this is particularly important to me because in a 1 sentence, but not an essay.
Yeah. So I guess what you're asking for, is there anyone that needs additional time to kind of
That's the first thing.
Pick your top 5?
Everybody ready to go then? All right, and our reporter will.
Can I say something to start with?
Of course.
There was one topic in one of the committees I served on that has been tried for the last several years. And the committee really didn't want to push it forward again, but there was one newbie on the committee. And they pushed it forward, and it probably won't happen, but you're going to get some of these in this mix that sound good this year, but last year the legislature wouldn't even look at them, and the year before and the year before. So think about those when you look at them.
You can mention that one maybe when we get to it. 1 sentence. Okay, everybody understands the rules of the game here, and our recorder will tally up the scores.
Do you want the words or the number letter?
So I think
I'm just going to read the words.
I think what we'll do is, Emily,
the table of contents.
you have a list of all the counselors. You can just put a 1 tick mark by each counselor each time they vote.
And once the counselor hits 5 votes, you're done voting. And Emily will.
Are you gonna track then on yours?
I will track that.
I will just tick mark then.
So.
I'll get 10.
Yeah. So
Okay.
you get
5 votes.
5 votes total between 2 hands, okay?
Okay, and you want me to vote too? Is that all right? It'll be 10 of us.
It's up to, yeah.
You all right with that?
Administer that.
No, yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Voting, yeah.
All right, good. I hear yeses. All right, so for instance, we'll start with the first one, which I'll label number 1, is full funding and alignment of state land use
Why don't you
initiative.
just use the number in the letter that's on the table of contents?
Okay, let me go to that.
So that's on page 148.
148. All right, let's do that. So 4A, we're talking about 4A now, which is the full funding and alignment of state laws. Who wants that as one of their 5 choices? We have 1 vote, Terry. Number
Yep.
2,
Got 4 left.
4B. Second one we're dealing with is 4B, local funding to address homelessness. Who would like that as one of their 5 choices? Anyone? No votes. Number 4C, infrastructure funding to support needed housing. Anybody like to choose that? Kirsten chooses that. 1 vote. Economic development, excuse me.
Can I cut in there real fast?
Sure.
I want to make sure, Emily, you're counting which items are getting votes, right? Or are you counting which
I
councilors?
thought I was counting which counselors.
Okay, then I have the other vote going. Good.
Okay.
All right, I want to make sure we're
Yeah.
not counting the same votes.
Okay, so that's,
Yep, I got it.
all right, good. Number 4D is economic development incentives. Okay, we have
Pause
1,
for a second.
2, 3, 4 votes for economic
Which were the
development.
4? Can you please raise your hand just for a second? Okay.
We have Larry, Bill,
Now I'm counting 5.
5,
So now there's 5.
Debbie,
Debbie,
Rod,
Rod,
and Michael.
Michael, Bill, and Larry.
You guys are not sitting alphabetical, so it takes me a while to find.
Okay, we'll go through this slowly.
Yeah, thank you.
Community resiliency and wildfire planning, which is 4E. Anybody want that? Terry wants that. Bill wants that. It's 2. All right. Number 5A, protecting public employees and officials. 5A, protecting employees and officials. Bill wants that. 1 vote. 5B, return to work. Anybody want that one? Kim wants that one. Kim, 1 vote. 5C, attorney-client privilege. Lane, you want to vote for that? Anyone there? No votes. All right, 5D, address.
Can't use my button. No, I don't need to go for that. Thank you.
Okay. 5D, address measure 110 shortcomings. That would include me, Brian, Kim, and Debbie. Brian, Kim, and Debbie, 3 votes. Next one, 6A, building decarbonization, efficiency, and modernization. 6A, anybody want that one? No votes. 6B, continue investments in renewable energy. We have Kirsten, 1 vote. We have investment now, 6C, investment in community climate planning resources. Any climate resources, people? None. 6D, adequate funding for state climate initiatives. Anybody there? Michael, we've got 1 vote. 7A, property tax reform. We have Brian, Larry, Ken, Bill, Debbie, Rod.
That's the one that they pushed.
Yeah, they push it every year. It goes nowhere, but it's vital, I think.
We get a prize.
Yeah.
All right, 7B, lodging tax flexibility. We have Brian, Ken, Kim, Debbie, Terry, and Michael. Popular. All right, 7C, economic development incentives. We have Larry, Ken, Bill, Kim, 4 votes.
How is that different than 4D?
Well, I don't know. 7D, marijuana taxes. Anybody happy about marijuana taxes? Nobody. Okay. 7E, alcohol revenues. Anybody there? Nope. 8A, digital equity and inclusion. Digital equity. We have Kirsten. 1 vote. B, resilient, future-proof broadband infrastructure and planning investment. Anybody for that? Nobody. C, incentives for broadband affordability, adoption, and consumer protections. Anybody for that? Nobody. 8D, cybersecurity and privacy. Anybody privacy advocate? We have Kim. 9A, transportation safety enhancement. That would be Ken, Terry, Kirsten. 3 votes. 9B, road user fee, vehicle miles travel structure. It's for electric vehicles, so we don't pay
Actually, I
taxes.
gotta add my vote back. A, the A.
A,
I had my number by the law.
you want
9A.
9A, you would want to be counted? Okay, that includes Michael now.
It's Michael.
Michael wanted to add for.
And that makes for 2 votes there.
That's 4 votes.
4 votes there, I'm sorry. Okay, 9B, that was, anybody there? Anybody on 9B? Road user fees? No. 9C, new mobility services, anybody? No votes. 9D, funding for recovery of abandoned recreational vehicles. Brian, Ken, Kim, do you used up all your votes? Larry, Debbie, and Rod. Get them off the streets.
That's
Coming
5.
closer.
That's 5 votes. Remember?
Who's,
That was 5 for that vote.
okay, 5 votes there. We're off to 10A, water utility rate and fund assistance. Water, no votes. 10B, place-based water resource planning.
I'm assuming this will help us with our reservoir situation. I didn't quite understand it completely, but.
Or is that D?
I think
Before we-
that's C, I thought was C.
Yeah, me too.
I
Can we
thought
have
B and C.
clarification about that?
Yeah, is it C or D?
Is there a D?
That would help us, that would help with our, dam.
I had the same question
I
that
think
you
both of
do.
them would
Larry.
help us, infrastructure, financing, and resilience.
That's what I was gonna vote on, but
That's what I was.
okay, but I want clarity.
Yeah, I
What am I
wonder which
voting
one's
on?
better.
I was
So,
gonna do both.
yeah, it's,
I'm done with that.
Me too.
so, I looked up the place-based water resource planning, earlier today. And so that's really talking about kind of a collaborative effort with, water, resource planning, and projects that support kind of a regional water
Okay, that's what-
approach. Which I think our reservoir project, we could make cases for kind of some regional water supply, especially in the short term. When we have a lot of surplus water, maybe we provide some, water to the Lucky watershed or something like that. So I think we can make a case for that. The infrastructure financing and resilience is really looking at the Special Public Works Fund and just making sure there's enough funding in there for water projects. I will say, if they tie it to, depending on where that money comes from to support the Special Public Works Fund, dam projects often are not eligible to apply for that funding. And so you may be restricted if that gets, capitalized at a larger amount anyway. So it just it really depends.
But what about finished water storage?
So finished water storage after, so that wouldn't help with the dam project, but it could help with, like the James Howe, reservoir that we're putting in out there. So I think that infrastructure financing and resilience would help with that project, may not help with the dam project. So the dam project, we're gonna try to tackle every funding source that we can, but any of the Safe Drinking Water Act funding or the Clean Water Act funding is not eligible for dam projects. Dam projects are not eligible for that funding under federal law. So a lot of funding that comes through down to the state is the source of that funding is from those 2 pots of money. So we really have to
access funding that's not that, so like general fund dollars from the state, which we're gonna put in requests through our legislators for that. And then getting money from the federal government through the Bureau of Reclamation, which they fund dam projects. That's where we're really gonna address the federal government, as well as just congressionally directed spending amounts from the federal government, which would be funneled probably through the Bureau of Reclamation anyway. But those are like earmarks of the federal government. So we're gonna try to get funding however we can, but I certainly think there is opportunities for us to get some planning work done with the place-based water resource planning, and also projects that we could do with infrastructure finance and resilience, accessing special public works funding.
Is there an answer buried in that somewhere to our question?
I think your question
What would you pick
I think
for dam?
for the dam,
For the-
I think you're more likely to get money on the place-based water resource planning for the dam. But I think that because I think the Special Public Works Fund money comes from the Clean and Safe Drinking Water Act from the federal government. And so you're probably more likely to have restricted funding through the Special Public Works Fund. But I think the Special Public Works Fund is more likely to help us with other water-related projects, like line replacement, upgrades, and reservoirs that are not part of the dam, like the finished water product.
Help us here.
I'm gonna lean that way.
Which one would you?
Well, I'm not voting, so
I'm sticking with
I
Massey.
think it's good for some people to vote whichever way they
I'm
want.
sticking with Massey.
All right, so I'm a dam voter, so
If you're a dam voter, I would go with place-based water.
okay, so let's go back over
10B.
10B and C then. So let's go with 10B, you dam folks, and the other one, C, was it? That would be more regular water
Yep.
type projects that we do and need and all that. Either one would be good for us.
Yes.
Okay,
So
good.
how's 10B? What's that look like?
10B, that's dam people. So we have me and Rod, that's two. And we have infrastructure, finance, and resilience, that's just general water people. That's 1, 2, 3. It's Rod,
I'm done
Michael,
now, 5.
And I'm done.
and Kirsten,
Everybody's
and
done. We're
Larry.
done vote. There's nothing left.
4, is that right? 4?
Darren, did you vote for that last one?
I think I can. I think I'm,
Yeah, you still have one vote left.
right.
You're the only
I'll vote for both of them.
You're voting both of them, all right. So
Okay.
you're covered. Darren.
I'm
No matter what
covered.
Dan answer was.
Yeah, I did. All right, so we don't need to know the answer immediately. It's a little processing to be done. I guess we could move on.
Nope, I have the answer for
Do you have the answer already?
I do. So your top 5 votes, the top vote getters were property tax reform and your lodging tax flexibility. That was 7A and 7B. Your next 3 tied with 5 votes each. That was the economic development incentives.
What numbers are those?
Which is 4D.
Thank you.
4D.
And also looking at the
What
things, I
about
think that's also 7C. I think those are pretty much the same. Although 7C only got 4 votes. So, that one didn't quite make the list. But if you count both your votes, yeah, actually, the top most vote getter. Anyways, 9D made the list, funding for recovery of abandoned RV vehicles, RVs. And then 10C, the infrastructure financing and resilience, got 5 votes. So your top 5 are 4D, 7A, 7B, 9D, and 10C.
And you'd probably have to count 7C. It's just got the same topic.
Yeah, I mean, I'll only vote for the one that's repeated once, not twice. Don't want to waste our
Okay.
time.
So you got your answer.
I got my answer.
That was a good process, I think. Thank you very much. It was kind of a challenge. That's a lot of information to swallow.
Y'all did well.
Okay, thank you. On to psychedelic mushrooms.
All right. I don't use them. So Measure 109 was passed in the year 2020, and that was a statewide measure. It passed, I think 15 counties in the state voted for it, and then the rest did not, so that's 21 counties against. But at the end of the day, the overall statewide vote, I think, was 54% to 45%, somewhere in there. In Polk County, the vote was 51% against Measure 109 to 48.6% in favor of Measure 109. And so what this does is it allows psilocybin to be used for treatment purposes, medicinal purposes. Psilocybin is I think the extract that you get from psychedelic mushrooms, also referred to as shrooms, if you go back in time. But we'll call it psilocybin tonight. So the ballot measure 109 that was passed allowed for local governments to either put in a temporary moratorium for 2 years, while that would allow Oregon Health Authority to create all the rulemaking and to kind of see the rollout of the implementation. Or you can do a prohibition on facilities that would process, manufacture, and distribute that product. And so, but you have to do it at a general statewide election, which is this year in 2022. And so in order to get it on the ballot for November of this year, you have to make a decision tonight on whether or not you want to do either a moratorium referral or a prohibition referral, so that it gives time for our city attorney to prepare the resolution, which would be in time to get it to the county to get put on the ballot at our next council meeting in August. So there's really 3 options that you can do tonight. It kind of follows a similar pattern to the medical marijuana and recreational marijuana ballot measures that were passed by the Oregon state voters. In that psilocybin is a controlled substance, it's a Schedule I substance, and would not be allowed under federal law. So what you did with marijuana was to say, we're not going to do a prohibition, we're not going to take to the voters, we're just going to say that our development code requires businesses to be in compliance with local, state, and federal laws. And so because it's a Controlled I substance at the federal level, even though marijuana is allowed at the state level, we would not allow those facilities in Dallas. So if you did that with psilocybin, we could go that same route and say that we would not permit those facilities because we still have that code provision. And as long as it's not allowed by federal law, regardless of what state law says, we would not allow them. I believe that there is some inherent risk to the city in doing that. It would likely be litigated or has the potential to be litigated. Marijuana took the litigated route with the city of Cape Junction and a dispensary down there, a recreational dispensary that was not allowed because of the federal law argument. That was settled out of court, and so it never made it all the way through the litigation process. So on the marijuana example, we don't have kind of a litigated outcome of taking the stance that the city of Dallas took with marijuana. So staff's recommendation is to either do a 2-year moratorium referral or the prohibition moratorium. The reason for that is if you were to prohibit, you as a council could always decide that you no longer want the prohibition because you've seen the rulemaking come out and maybe it's, you feel comfortable with psilocybin facilities being located in your city limits. So you can always repeal the prohibition after it takes effect in the future. And so there's really no harm in putting that out to the voters and having them vote to prohibit. Or the voters might say, no, we're okay with them in our community. And the referral is, again, a no harm, no foul. You put it out to the voters and they make, have them make the decision. But if the outcome were to be to prohibit, that could always be undone in the future. My understanding, and Lane, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, I believe this is the only opportunity you have to refer this item to the voters under the Measure 109 language. And so that's
correct.
Yes. So, so again, taking the prohibition or the moratorium route, this is your only shot at it, right? So while you can always, repeal that prohibition or the moratorium in the future, you cannot impose a prohibition. So you would rely again, if you did nothing tonight, you would rely on the language in the development code that says we don't allow these because it's not in compliance with federal law, as long as this substance is controlled as a Schedule I drug. So staff again would recommend if you want to just wait the 2 years in a moratorium, you can refer that to the voters or to refer the prohibition, which could always be undone. So That's what I'm looking at as a presentation for tonight. And depending on which way you want to go, I can craft a motion quickly to have that decision.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I just want to concur with Brian's recommendation. I am confident of the city's interpretation of the development code with regard to the recreational marijuana dispensaries. I mean, we have the time, we have the opportunity here, we can do it, get this referral out to the voters. Let them make the decision, and if they should vote to disallow, then it really is beyond questions, that would be the reality. And then same thing as to the moratorium, if we want to do that. But again, we have the time, we have the opportunity. I would recommend the council make a decision to either not refer and allow these to go forward based on your decision not to refer any questions to voters, or refer one of those questions to the voters either to impose a 2-year moratorium or just go ahead and outright prohibit. As Brian said, that can always be considered by ordinance. The council could undo a prohibition on its own. It wouldn't take a vote of people to go the other direction from a disallowance to an allowance. But if you want to have an opportunity to disallow this, the greatest path to get that.
So you kind of answered my question. So the prohibition is the prohibition, but the moratorium is the moratorium, and that's what it is. But the prohibition, we can change that later on.
That's correct. The moratorium, you would need to come back and take some further action before the moratorium expires, or by default, they would be allowed. If you wanted to disallow after the 2-year moratorium, you need to have that action referred out before the expiration of that 2-year period.
And a lot of communities that are looking at the moratorium, the reason they're looking at a moratorium is because the rules from the Oregon Health Authority are just coming out on this. And so the moratorium would allow the cities to put in place reasonable time, manner, and place restrictions in their municipal codes or in their development codes before, but allow cities time to develop the proper codes to regulate these facilities.
Wouldn't we also have that time if we did a prohibition?
You would have that time to do a prohibition. So if you feel you need more time than 2 years, or you just don't want to see these facilities at all in Dallas, you would do a prohibition. If you just want some time to develop codes because you're okay with them, then maybe you don't want them located within certain businesses of schools or other things like that, and you want to develop local regulations, and you feel you can do that within 2 years, the 2-year moratorium would be appropriate.
So the international research on the psychotherapeutic benefits of psilocybin are phenomenal. My concern is that the way we've got this worded, it includes and distribution, which would mean, and right now what the rules are saying is that psilocybin is a therapeutic use. So this isn't, the comparison to cannabis and medicinal versus recreational is a fallacy, because this is used in therapeutic settings for severe PTSD. And so I'm concerned that if we include the and distribution portion of that, what we're doing is we're handcuffing therapists who can work with individuals who may benefit from this. This isn't something you're not going to see, as things are written today, you are not going to see a cannabis and psilocybin shop. This is a substance that is used in a usually 4 to 6 hour session with a highly trained psychotherapist.
And I want to be very clear that I was not comparing the therapeutic or medicinal purposes of marijuana to psilocybin. I was simply referring to the process of referring items to the ballot, to what we did with Measure 97 to what Measure 109 allows. So it's strictly, I was not comparing at all the therapeutic and or medicinal purposes between those two substances. I was simply saying both of those are controlled substances at the federal government.
Mm-hmm. They're both Schedule 1.
Right, so they could both be prohibited by the city of Dallas through our development code provisions. Both those measures also allowed the cities to refer those items to the voters for prohibitions. The Measure 109 allows, which is the psilocybin, allows for the referral for a moratoria, which Measure 97 did not. And so I was simply referring to the process to refer these items to the ballot and not anything with their medicinal and therapeutic values. Just be clear on that.
I didn't,
Yeah.
the and distribution is where I have a
And I
concern.
understand that.
Where is the distribution portion of this?
Distribution and language in the ballot.
Mhm.
Debbie,
I think my biggest concern with this is the same that I have with marijuana use. I don't care what the adults decide to do. However, we do have illegally manufactured marijuana farms, labs, hash labs, all kinds of stuff. I guarantee you we have the same thing here because I know several high school students and that's their weekend activity is shrooms. So I think by opening it up and allowing any dispensary, it's different when you have, I've worked with cancer patients many times, years ago, that used medical marijuana. Totally different than just going and picking it up down on Ellendale and taking it back home or whatever. I think it'll be the same thing with this. I think you will have valid therapists and medical professionals using it. Psychotherapists, it's been wildly successful in controlled settings since the 60s. We don't have those settings now. Now we're moving into it's just everywhere. So I see a huge problem with, well, we'll just let them open up this little shop here. That's not how it works. That's not how weed works. That's not how any drugs work. It's here now. As I'm sure many people know this, it's here now and it's all over. Our kids, not my kids, because thank God she's 10, but there are kids all over the place. That's what they do every weekend.
Terry
They're not even
Nickerson.
shy about it.
Yeah, my thought was that if this is a medical professional, he's going to have the ability to do that prescription. And the other issue is basically it's going to be recreational use. And so basically my attitude is we don't need a shop for recreational use of this drug. And so it really, the argument about production and distribution of it should be moot because that medical professional can basically get and use it on their patients.
Kirsten.
Yeah, so the measure, there is no option for a community shop. The only people who would be able to have access to psilocybin are highly trained psychotherapeutic professionals. So the idea that there would be a store is not possible at this. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen years in the future, but that's not what this conversation is about. Allowing psychotherapeutic benefit only in controlled settings. So it's not like it's available to anyone else, the substances. And I understand a community concern around the processing and manufacturing. Those things I totally understand. It's the and distribution that I'm concerned about. But the concept of we don't want this kind of to get out there isn't an option. At this point, it's not even on the table.
Okay. Lane, you see that way, that this isn't for psychedelic mushroom shops?
Yeah, it's not a retail sale.
No retail sales. This would be under clinically controlled circumstances. That's correct.
And
I agree.
Lane, the word distribution here is talking about having a distribution facility that would deliver the product to the medically trained professionals. Is that what we're referring to when we're talking about distribution in the?
No, I think it's going to be distribution to
These are the three options.
you have manufacturer, delivery, and administration. why I want to turn that question. Are we thinking of cutting it down the middle and allowing one to the other with,
So I just want to address Councilor Collins' concern. So it says, under the measure, I'm looking on page 169. I don't know if that's also where you're looking. It says state law allows operation, manufacture, distribution, and possession of psilocybin and psilocin. State law provides that a city council may adopt an ordinance to be referred to voters. So the distribution word there, right, Councilor Collins, is the one you're concerned about? Right, and that's the distribution from a provider to a patient is what you're asking?
That is exactly what I'm asking, yes.
And that's what Lane, you think that's referring to? So your concern is prohibiting that?
Correct. Maybe it's my question. Is what we're currently thinking about, would that prohibit a highly trained psychotherapist from being able to access this modality?
In Dallas city
In
limits,
Dallas.
yes. This ballot, if you used this ballot title, it would not allow for manufacturing, distribution in a healthcare setting, or possession of those drugs in Dallas. The way this is written.
That's what we'll see.
We can change it later if we want.
So just to be clear, the way this is working right now is that it wouldn't be a prescription you could pick up. Like years ago, I could get a prescription and then smoke marijuana on my own if I had cataracts or cancer. This substance must be used in a controlled setting, and psychotherapists are trained, and the entire time from prior to administration, through therapy, through what's called come down, all of that occurs in a therapeutic setting. So there isn't any, you could pick it up and do this at home. That's not an option. Okay, I think my question has been answered.
Under the OHA rules,
Okay, Mike.
the ballot measure as it's written would prohibit that use in that clinic setting.
And what qualification, I mean, we're saying highly trained. Who?
Psychotherapist.
So, yeah, so it's like licensed by the state.
Okay.
So the main thing here that bothers me is OHA has not written the rules. So we're going to agree to something, and then they're going to make up the rules. And then I just don't understand that. Wait, I don't trust OHA at all based on, we'll get to the rules later. No, you've had 2 years. You haven't written the rules in 2 years? How do we know what they can be?
Yeah, and
I think it's very, very odd to say
And
the
that's another reason why you have the 2-year moratorium, which is
Right.
to allow those rules to be written and the response from the city to impose reasonable time, manner, and place restrictions. Yeah, Blaine.
Let me just clarify what we're talking about here. You've got the manufacturer of psilocybin products. Those are prepared by a licensed manufacturer, and they're put into a tracking system, and they're delivered to a licensed testing laboratory, and then to a service center, a licensed service center in a community. Then the way clients access psilocybin is they're going to meet with a licensed facilitator. The client consumes the product at the service center with the licensed facilitator, and then can follow up about your support and other resources. But that's sort of the business of psilocybin. You're right, it won't be to pick up a bag like marijuana and take it out of the street. But this, a prohibition would be to prohibit manufacture within the city of Dallas, manufacture distribution to a licensed testing laboratory or to a licensed service center, and it would prohibit the dispensing and administration of psilocybin to clients of facilitators within the city of Dallas.
Terry and Rod.
Just a question, do we have any qualified professionals practicing in the city of Dallas at the present? Or do people have to go to Salem anyway?
If I may, is the state's looking at licensing these folks, so that's the,
Anyone like to do it today?
Right. Could there be people that could be qualified? I think the answer to that is yes, there could be people. But as of right now, the rules are still being finalized, licenses. I think they just started accepting applications within the last couple of weeks.
but
I mean, another concern, I mean, Blaine's mentioned, we all said it, but the manufacturer, I mean, they could set up an industrial zone and do the manufacturing. I'd be concerned about the manufacturing of the psilocybin, how you say it, mushroom.
Well, they're subject to reasonable, time and place restrictions, but yeah, probably in industrial zones where you would place these things. You can't, just like marijuana, you can't regulate to the point that they, can't be located anywhere in the city, because that's the fact of prohibition. You can limit where they will be located. And under state law, I think just like marijuana, there are distance limitations around schools and other facilities like that. But the cities can impose their own reasonable restrictions as well. But you can't regulate to the point that they could not locate in the city, because that's the fact of prohibition.
Christian, then
We're killing it.
But they can't, the manufacturing of psilocybin is in effect prohibited in the city of Dallas by our code that said you've got to pass 3 tests. It has to be legal in our city, it has to be legal in our state, and it has to be legally federal. And
I would argue that as we did with the marijuana, as Brian said, though, that it's got an opportunity here to take the voters and go through the process in the ballot measure, and complete their answer.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think as Lane said, that fact has not been argued. And I mentioned the marijuana case with Cave Junction, but Cave Junction had, used that same argument with marijuana facilities. That was litigated, but they settled outside of court. And so there's not been a litigation process that's been resolved through the courts. So we don't have an answer on whether or not that defense would survive a legal challenge. I agree with Lane, I think it will survive a legal challenge. But when you have an opportunity, if you want to prohibit anyway based on that factor, putting it out to the voters and doing it the way that it was prescribed in the measure, I think is a surefire way of making sure that you're legally defensible.
yes.
Lane, question for you. So if we do a moratorium and that's up in 2 years, then do we lose the ability to put a prohibition out if we don't like
There's been a conversation going around the city attorney's midterm, and the consensus is that no, we can do a prohibition within the period of the moratorium, as long as it states that the full moratorium expires.
within the 2 years? So therefore you would have to do it within the 2 years. Or we can do the prohibition now and repeal it at a later time.
And Lane, if during that moratorium, are you required to do the prohibition? Does that require a vote of the people, and does that have to be done at the general election in 2024?
Yeah, that's converging to the city attorney's midterm. We would do that in November of 24. And we would make sure that our moratorium ends beyond the effective date of any measure of that election. Folks are just reading this and getting up to this now, but that's the common interpretation. If you have the moratorium now, you can repeal within the period of the 2-year moratorium. Through a vote of the voters.
Right.
Sorry.
I'd like to direct the staff to prepare a ballot measure with the prohibition.
Permanent ban,
Second.
it's a permanent ban, prohibition,
Yeah, the prohibition.
okay. And it's been seconded. Ken made the motion, Bill seconded it. So we have a motion on the floor for a permanent ban in accordance with this ballot title and so forth. That is the sample. Okay. All right, discussion time. I guess we discussed it pretty well, so we have our opinions. Why don't we do a roll call? Because I'm not sure that this is going to be unanimous. All right. We have on the floor then a referral. It would be a referral to the ballot on a permanent ban of psilocybin.
And it just passes tonight, bring back to the next meeting, a resolution for an election, and with that would be, the ordinance itself, text resolution, two examples being passed tonight.
I'm sorry, I don't hear you clearly.
What he said is that he will, if this motion were to pass, to direct the city attorney to prepare the resolution
Right.
for the prohibition of psilocybin
Yes.
and its facilities. He'll prepare the resolution for the council at the next meeting on
Right.
August 1st to vote on that resolution, which would then refer the item to the ballot in November of 2022. That resolution will include the draft ordinance, which would take effect if the ballot measure passes.
Good.
That's correct.
That's your motion, right, Kevin? Okay. All right, so we have the motion, we have the second, we have no discussion. Secretary will call the roll.
Council President Schilling?
Yes.
Councilor Briggs?
Yes.
Councilor Collins?
No.
Councilor Crawford?
Yes.
Councilor Denham?
Yes.
Councilor Fitzgerald?
Yes.
Councilor Hahn?
Yes.
Councilor Burton?
Yes.
Councilor Woods?
Yes.
All right, motion passes with one negative vote. Thank you very much. Interesting discussion. Any other interesting things for us? Say the expanded pre-treatment water storage.
Yes, so we also have the expanded pretreatment water storage site selection process. You heard the discussion and the process during the work session. Introduced Gary Marks, our Public Works Director, to give the staff report on this item.
Good evening, Mayor Dalton, members of the council. I'm very pleased to be here tonight as this agenda item really represents a very significant milestone and a priority that you identified as the number one priority for the city. In that, we are, with the motion that the staff has recommended that you approve that, we are moving the process from determining the parameters, what we need to do, to actually start working on a specific project. So the motion basically says that you're approving the Jacobs report and that you're authorizing staff and our consultant team to move forward with developing the existing Mercer location for a larger storage facility. And then coming back to you, should our negotiations with state agencies result in a requirement for annual fish passage downstream, of course, you heard Craig talk about the significant increases in the expense of that project. This motion would have us come back to you in that event for further discussion about whether we should pursue an off-channel alternative. So for the record of the council meeting, I wanted to just quickly sum up the reasons for the recommendation to expand the Mercer facility. Of course, the number one reason would be that it expands our storage. Right now, we have 1,200 acre feet of water storage in the Mercer reservoir. And this proposal increases that to 4,900 acre feet, so more than fourfold increase in our water storage capability, which still is about 12 to 16% of the watershed production. So this still only captures a very small portion of that. The other reasons are that it creates a higher stream flow during the summer months, which results in cooler temperatures. Of course, both of those benefits accrue to our fisheries. It provides, I don't know if Craig mentioned this one, but it does create a higher dilution of our treated effluent. Once it reaches discharge at the creek, it benefits downstream ag with higher flows in the summertime when they're in growing season. It has the smallest carbon footprint of the options that we looked at. It also limits the disturbance of habitat in that the part of the dam that already, the reservoir that already exists has already been disturbed. We're not going someplace else to disturb a whole new area of habitat. And then the bottom line is it's the least expensive Other options that we looked at, there were 7, checked the boxes. On some of these, none of them checked all the boxes. And fortunately, the one that checks all the boxes is also the least expensive. So with that, I would recommend that you would pass the motion that's in the staff report, which I described earlier. If you have any questions, I will respond.
Questions? Nope. I think Craig did a wonderful job.
He did.
I think and he's come to us several times and is well trusted.
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay, go for it. We'll take the motion, instead of reading it as long, it's on the recommended motion on page 171. So Ken makes the motion and Michael seconds it. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Sounds enthused. Thank you. Unanimous.
Thank you, Mayor. And then the last report is discussed earlier today by Council President Schilling. So Crazy Days is just around the corner, a little over a week away. I want to recognize a couple of our staff members here tonight who have put in a lot of time in preparation for this. Our Assistant City Manager, Emily Gonder, and our Police Chief, Tom Simpson. They've been leading the planning effort on this exciting community event. We feel that this event is going to be even bigger and better than last year. We have also expanded our partnership with the Chamber of Commerce. They will be hosting the parade, so we will have the parade back this year. It is a modified route. It starts at the same place it's always started, at the corner of Jefferson and Washington. It will run itself north up to the Y intersection. It'll loop around, come up to Academy, but because of the event being placed on Main Street, it will then turn to the west on Academy Street, exiting out towards Levens where the parade will end. So that's the parade route this year, and we're really excited that the Chamber has stepped up to take on that event. My understanding is there are just under 50 entries in the parade, which is good for it not being around for the last 3 years. So we're really excited for that. The city has also expanded the amount of vendors for the event this year. We have 100 registered vendors and a waiting list of several people in case anyone drops off between now and the middle of next week. We also have 14 food vendors in addition to the 100. So we'll have a lot of food and drinks available, and that includes I think 4 vendors inside the Sipperby, which is both beer and wine. So that's what we have.
That's up from 60 vendors from last year.
Yes, and so you're about double the number of vendors from last year to this year. And I would say last year, we had vendors that were selling out of their products on day 2. And so we told everyone, we told them last year too, you had to be here all 3 days. A couple of them just said, well, I don't have anything to sell. And I'm like, go home and make stuff. That's my response. And they said, not by tomorrow. So this year, I think they will be very prepared. I also want to recognize Brittany Hamill with our police department. She's not here tonight, but she's put in a lot of effort in working both with getting events organized, getting the concerts lined up, and helping with the vendors. We also have a community member named Brett Matson, who has volunteered on the committee. And he's running the vendors and making sure and getting all that organized. Tara County with the Chamber is working steadily on the parade. They're also going to do a little bit of a car show in the Academy building parking lot. So that'll be kind of a nod to a little bit of what the Rotary Club did on the Sunday morning with the breakfast and the car show. The Rotary is not doing the car show this year, so they're doing a little bit of a car show on Saturday in the Academy building. We're going to have water ball back again this year. That's always a fun event to come watch between the police and fire departments. Todd and Tom, you know, they like each other now, but they won't on Saturday evening. So that'll be fun. So we're looking forward to that now that we have ample water this year. We're not in drought conditions. And there's just going to be a lot of fun. So cornhole tournaments, you know, paint by number for the community, all sorts of activities and lots of music. So it's going to be a great time. We hope to bring in a lot of people. We're advertising this far and wide, billboards on I-5 and stuff of that nature. You saw one?
I did.
Yeah. So we're excited. We think it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have our Main Street banner hung up tomorrow. And yeah, it's gonna be great stuff. So we're looking forward to it. That'll be a lot of fun.
Breakfast in the park, tickets.
Breakfast in the park tickets are $11, Ken. I'm looking at him because he's on Rotary too. I believe they're $11.
I don't think so.
$10?
I didn't look at the price.
Hey, where do we
It
get
used to be
them?
really cheap.
3 or 4.
And that's at the park. Oh, you want me to tell my comment about the park? So that's.
Where do we get the tickets?
I'll sell them this week or next week. over
Yes,
on
we'll be selling
the-
them at the Crazy Days event. The Rotary will have the tent
Okay.
in the vendor area, so that'll be good. And then John Barnard Park. So, John Barnard Park, we had that planned in our strategic plan to get that constructed in this coming fiscal year that we're in now. We applied for a grant with the Oregon State Parks Department. We were invited to present that to the Oregon State Parks Department, which we did this last week. Our staff member did a great job. Unfortunately, we were told that we were not going to be awarded that grant. So that was a bit of a blow. That was a $750,000 grant that we had applied for. We have money in our Parks SDCs that we felt could cover the project. That was a little before supply chain issues and other things have caused the prices to increase. So we're going to do a little bit of value engineering and critical thinking on what we can do. We may need to phase in some of the improvements, but we're still planning on getting that construction underway this fiscal year. Probably be next spring and summer.
We got 35,000 from the Blazers.
We did get $35,000 from the Portland Trailblazers. That will be contributed towards that park as well.
And you said we might roll it out?
So we might have to look at and value engineer and scale back the project. Maybe it'll be done in phases or other things like that, to be able to get all of the costs of the project to completion. Just because we've seen an increase in the price of materials and everything else. So we will roll that out, construction in this fiscal year, next, so the spring of 23 into the summer, and we'll use Park SDCs to fund that. We were really hoping to get the grant to preserve Park SDCs for other projects as well. So, but we do have Park SDCs, and we'll continue to collect those, and you might just have to phase in some of the improvements at the park.
The All Abilities grant that we received from the Trailblazers will not be phased in though.
No, that's rolled into the project cost, and that will be constructed with the project in the first phase.
Thank you all. Oliver?
Yeah, that's all for my reports.
Okay, good. We got a couple of second readings of ordinances. The first one is ordinance 1874, an ordinance amending provisions of Del City Code relating to nuisance abatement and repealing sections 5.454, 5.456, 5.458, 5.460, and 5.610. Any questions about that before we vote? Nope. I declare ordinance 1874 to pass its second reading. Will now place final passage. Secretary, call the roll.
Counselor Briggs?
Yes.
Counselor Collins?
Yes.
Counselor Crawford?
Yes.
Counselor Dunham?
Yes.
Counselor Fitzgerald?
Yes.
Counselor Hahn?
Yes.
Counselor Burton?
Yes.
Counselor Woods?
Yes.
Council President Schilling?
Yes.
Excellent. I declare ordinance number 1874 passed by unanimous vote on to 1875, an ordinance declaring 15.35 acres more or less of territory being Polk County tax lot 0850300000800 located at commonly known as 12695 Cloud Corner Road, annexed to the city of Dallas and withdrawn from Southwest Polk Rural Fire Protection District and designating zoning of said properties as industrial. Okay. Any further talk about that? Hearing none. Secretary, call the roll.
Counselor Collins?
No.
Counselor Crawford?
No.
Counselor Dunham?
This is bringing, sorry, just clarifying, this is bringing it into the city.
Yes, this
Correct.
is annexed
As
to land.
industrial.
Yes.
So we have 2 no's so far, correct?
Counselor Fitzgerald?
No.
Counselor Hahn?
Yes.
Counselor Burton? No. Counselor Woods,
Yes.
Council President Schilling,
Yes.
Counselor Briggs,
Yes.
5-4, yes.
Okay, so it passes barely. We got the required 5 votes. So 5-4. All right, on to resolutions. Resolution 3490, a resolution authorizing a loan from the Special Public Works Fund by entering into an interim financing contract with the Oregon Infrastructure Finance Authority. Ryan, that's just a note on that.
Yep, so just apologize in the council packet if you received it. We had the wrong title for that resolution. The correct information is in the packet. Gary Marks, our Public Works Director here, is here if you have any questions. This is authorizing that loan for the project that we've talked about previously. So.
Yeah, a quick review. Last December, I notified the council that city staff discovered a significant leak in the southwest cell of the 4-cell reservoir complex at Clay Street. To fix that leak, we'll have to remove the floating cover, and actually we need to remove all the floating cover from all 4 cells because they've aged out. So I came back to you in February with a resolution that authorized the city manager to submit a $2.2 million Special Public Works Fund loan application to Business Oregon. We were recently notified by Business Oregon that they were awarding us an interim finance contract. The word interim, to clarify that, what that means is that Business Oregon periodically has bond sales. And when they sell those bonds and they bring in the cash, then they offer the final loan docs to entities that they've given interim financing to until the time that they do the bond sale. So we're waiting for the next bond sale for our permanent financing. So for now, which lets us get going on the project, we have been offered a $2.2 million interim financing contract from the state at the rate of 0.045% interest per annum. I do recommend that you approve this, and we will get going on fixing this leak and replacing the covers on the reservoir. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to respond.
Questions? Looks like none. Thank you, Gary. On we go. It's resolution 3490, as I said. No questions. Secretary will call the roll.
Counselor Crawford,
Yes.
Counselor Dunham,
Yes.
Counselor Fitzgerald,
Yes.
Counselor Hahn,
Yes.
Counselor Burton, yes. Counselor Woods,
Yes.
Council President Schilling,
Yes.
Counselor Briggs,
Yes.
Counselor Hahn.
Yes.
Thank you. I declare resolution 3490 to have passed by unanimous vote. Any other business come before the council this evening? Anybody have anything for us? If not, we'll see you in a couple of weeks to this fine place. Appreciate your patience with this large agenda. Thick.
Nice.